Montgomery County Public Schools. I see Ed Clark is on as well. We need to keep in mind that our partners, Montgomery County Public School is a very important partner to all of us, and they need to be comfortable that their facilities are safe in every way for everyone that's there. And we need to very publicly thank Chief Jones and all the Montgomery County Police Department for all that they're doing and what they're doing. They are working with all of us to get us to that safest place. And though I could go on, and I'm going to stop here because I want to hear from my colleagues, obviously, and then I also want to get to the actual briefing. But we needed to have this discussion before the Magruder High School incident, and of course, the Magruder High School incident has caused that much more, many more people to be involved in the topic. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Let me turn to Councilmember Navarro, followed by Council President Albornoz.
Thank you, Chairman Rice. And first of all, I want to congratulate Dr. McKnight. This is definitely such an important moment in our county's history, and there's no doubt that you are poised and you are the best possible leader at this moment in time. I wish you, of course, all the best, and we'll continue to collaborate. These are such uncertain times, and we're going to need to stick together and to work together on behalf of all our constituents. So congratulations. And it's great to be here to have this conversation, even though it is with a backdrop of some extraordinarily tragic incidents in our county. And I'm not going to say much other than to acknowledge and recognize that everything has absolutely changed. I am absolutely convinced that these 2 years and counting have come to really reset in so many ways everything that we have known. And it is, I think, our collective responsibility to quickly retool to respond to what, in my opinion, is just a new paradigm. We did start to look at this intersection of public safety, racial equity and social justice, mental health needs, quite a while ago. I mean, there are 3 pages in this packet that describe a timeline and the different efforts. And I'm not going to rehash the history because I've always been a believer that we must be deliberate and quick in addressing whatever it is that we see is becoming a challenge. And I think that we had a lot of great responses and a lot of great proposals, but I think that we also had a lot of missed opportunities to be deliberate, especially when students were in virtual settings, to truly engage in coming up with a strategy that could be implemented that was holistic. And I know I attempted to look at the different information that was out there, the feedback from all stakeholders, proposals from all my colleagues, from the executive, et cetera, to just begin to put together a holistic blueprint. Unfortunately, that was not, it was not even discussed and it was not adopted. But I still think that we need to be mindful of the role that holistic approaches play in a moment like this one, because it's never either or. You know, we have these committee meetings sometimes in silos, and I used to say, we've got to figure out that sweet spot, because on the one hand, you have members of our community saying, we don't want any police presence in our communities. And on the other hand, you had other members of our community saying, we don't have enough police presence and we're being victimized. And how do you also respond to parents that say, I want public safety to be a priority, while you also recognize issues around disproportionality and issues of, arrests that are disproportionate, that affect our Black and Brown students, while you also address issues of mental health. And so the good news is that there's so much to work with. because we have studied this. We know where our gaps are. We know what it is that is the most desirable state. And we have now this opportunity to quickly retool and do something. I love the idea of continuing to work with the community. At the same time, I think our community is feeling like we've had up-teen work groups and up-teen, task forces. And we're kind of talking in circles. I think it's time to move forward to do something that is bold in response to what it is, what this moment means, and what we are going to face going forward. I've heard people describe this time as people walking around with PTSD, and it's no hyperbole, it's real. And so I want to thank all of you for continuing to be so dedicated to this, to finding that model. It will not be perfect, as Chairman Rice said, but I think that we can really, truly make a difference quickly. And of course, I am really excited about this opportunity to do something bold around wellness centers and around youth employment, because we need to be forward thinking as well, not just responding to what's happening right now, but also how are we setting things up to help our young people and our families moving forward as we try to crawl out of this time. So again, thank all of you. I want to thank the community. Particularly, I continue to hold very close the family members, the loved ones of our students who have been victims, and all those students and families who've also been affected by suicides and continue to face challenges around mental health. It's a tough time, but I think that we owe to our community, we owe to them to come up with a quick, robust, holistic approach and stop talking so much about it. Just act and let's do that. So thank you so much for indulging me.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Navarro. Council President Albornoz.
Thank you. My colleagues have done a really good job of framing this conversation and providing context. And Chairman Rice, I've heard you give a lot of speeches, but that was like top 5 for me because that was really beautifully laid out in terms of the chronology of getting us to where we are today. And I thought you did a good job acknowledging that there are differing opinions on this issue, passionate differing opinions on this issue. But what we all agree on is that there's nothing more important than the safety and security, literal but also emotional, of our children, youth, and families, but also our faculty and staff. As Councilmember Navarro just stated, she's absolutely right. We've all experienced some level of trauma these last 2 years, and especially our most vulnerable populations. I just want to say 3 things. The first is, as I provide some context on my thinking before we have this conversation, number 1 is this: I have a tremendous amount of respect and confidence in the professionals, both within Montgomery County Public Schools, also Montgomery County Police, and our Department of Health and Human Services, who are working the most closely together on the government side to coordinate programs and services. And there have been relationships established over generations that have helped engender trust and really best practices, both at the system-wide level, but also at the individual school levels as well. And we're going to need to lean in on that infrastructure and that trust and that communication as we try and address what's happening on the ground right now, which is different, which does feel different, because it is different in what our kids are experiencing and the level of crimes that we have seen rise here in our community as well. And so I have always felt that it should be at the operational level where most of these decisions are made, and that my colleagues in the legislative body play a critically important role to provide support, to provide resources, to connect dots. But I think that as we're about to hear in this conversation and updates on where things stand with a community engagement officer position, I have a high degree of confidence in our current system. The second thing I would say is that this is not just, as we all know, an MCPS and MCPD issue. This is an all hands on deck situation. Every one of us has a role to play either directly within our schools or in and around our schools, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, to support these children, youth, and families in the way that they need support. And so this is a broader conversation beyond the one we are just about to have. And we all know that, but sometimes it's hard for us to process that in a way that makes sense and that we can communicate clearly to our public. But this has never been an either or, and it continues to not be. We need to provide strong mental health, social supports for our kids and our families, while also ensuring that we have well-trained and dedicated professionals in the safety and security space who can address the needs, the very many complex needs of our kids. And the final thing I'll say is this, for now. I've seen what it looks like when a caring adult, including a law enforcement official, establishes a relationship and trust with our kids. And that is paramount to helping to help address very complex issues, to solve cases, to head really complex and dangerous situations off at the pass before they spiral out of control. And so I think with the appropriate support, the appropriate training, the appropriate construct for us to have open communication and transparency, that I know we can get this right. And it will never be perfect. The situation will continue to evolve. But I've seen what it looks like when it works well. And I know that that's not just isolated. That can be the rule, and it will be the rule. And we're going to make sure that we do everything we can to support everybody to be in the best possible position to succeed. So thank you very much, Chairman Rice. I yield back to you.
Thank you. I've got Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations, first of all, to Dr. McKnight. I'm really excited about your appointment. I am glad we had a chance to talk before and after, and I'm very much enjoyed all our conversations. Really looking forward to doing everything I can to support you at this time of crisis for our whole county and our school system, and want to do everything I can to support you and all of our students, including my two kids at Rolling Terrace, and all of their classmates and all the students that look like them and fit that demographic. In particular, we have a lot of solutions in front of us. I'm truly excited, so congratulations. We've had lots of wonderful plans, and I want to acknowledge everything that's been said about the great recommendations that we've received from the Student Wellbeing Action Group and the Reimagining School Safety and Student Wellbeing Committee and the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. I think we have to approach public policy on two tracks, as we always do. We have to, aspire to figure out the best thing we can possibly be doing while we're actually doing the work of protecting our young people and our educators and our staff. And while all of these important agencies and groups have been meeting with the council and MCPS, we still have serious incidents that have risen dramatically, and not just here, in other counties as well. But we can only control our county. And clearly there's an enormous amount of stress and anxiety and multiple levels of trauma at many schools that our students are feeling, and many of their caregivers are feeling under COVID, that have gone unaddressed during this time. And several of us believed we wanted to have the funding for behavioral health workers in the current budget and in place by September. I know the HHS didn't want to do that until they had a detailed plan. That's all behind us now, but it's still very troubling that we're still dealing with a predictable tidal wave of unaddressed mental health issues among our young people and their caregivers. And I'm glad we were able to appropriate the funding in November, and I'm still concerned that there hasn't been enough hiring or contracting with behavioral health workers to fill all those seats that we need every single day. And as Councilmember Navarro has said, we have to start somewhere. Now is really the time for action. We can perfect the model while we're executing the model, but we have to execute as well, and we can't wait. So we have best practices from other jurisdictions that are not just ahead of us now. Many jurisdictions have had more behavioral health workers in their schools for years to protect their young people. We can't let waiting for the perfect plan stand in the way of immediate interventions and supports and referrals and building out long-term solutions like the number of wellness centers. I agree with Councilmember Navarro. We have to do something bold around wellness centers. My only quibble is I don't think it's that bold, frankly. I've talked to principals and teachers that have been asking for more support for 10 years. And we've lost too many of our young people in the last few weeks, and far too many others are suffering and are at risk today. And I don't want to lose any more. So everyone's an individual story, but truthfully, we'll never know whether better staffing might have made a difference for any of the individuals or any of our other young people who are suffering today. So I don't know. I've been in policymaking for 15, 20 years, and I always ask myself, are we doing everything we can? And in this case, I don't think we're doing everything we can. We still have avoidable, predictable gaps. And I think we know an awful lot of the solutions. We can't wait. We have to confidently step forward and execute more of them today and beyond today. So I'm glad we're having this discussion, and I really hope it leads to more vigorous execution of the solutions that are in front of us. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Hucker. And that is absolutely terrific lead-in for me being able to turn it over to our partners with both Montgomery County Public Schools and our police department, because I think that today represents action. Action items for us. While we have no action in terms of the county council voting on something today, I think that today represents us moving forward. And my hope is that many of the issues that you highlighted, that many of my colleagues have highlighted, remain things that we put at the forefront, including when it comes to mental health. I know we just had a joint meeting with our Education and Culture and Health and Human Services committee to discuss that. So let me start off with an introduction of who's here today. We have from our Montgomery County Police Department, Chief Marcus Jones. We have Assistant Chief Carmen Faccialo, who is the lead for community resources with Montgomery County Police Department. We have Captain Stacy Flynn, who's the leader of our Community Engagement Officer program with our Community Engagement Division. We have Dr. McKnight, who is our brand new superintendent of schools. I like that it doesn't say interim any longer, for Montgomery County Public Schools, along with Jimmy DeAndrea, who's the chief of staff for Montgomery County Public Schools, Rochelle Rubin, who's our chief of teaching, learning, and schools, Damon Monteleone, who's our assistant chief of teaching, learning, and schools with Montgomery County Public Schools, Ed Clark, who's the chief of school security for MCPS, and Linda Farrell, who's the special assistant to the superintendent with Montgomery County Public Schools. So I want to thank you all for being on the call today. I am going to turn it over to Dr. McKnight, but just wanted to say one thing at the very end. I, on Friday morning, ran into Officer Wes Allen. He and I were at the gym. We go to the same LA Fitness. And I saw him, and he was the former school resource officer at Northwest High School, where both of my daughters attended. Now one of my daughters attends. And he wanted to tell me a story. He said, look, Craig, I know that you're having a difficult time as you guys try and figure out what the next steps are, but let me just share something with you. And he told me the story about a person who had actually reached out to him probably a couple weeks ago, he had said, maybe a month ago, and was asking him his advice. And he said this was a young person who had been at risk, who he was very concerned about, was always, not always making the best decisions to make sure that their future was sound. And he said the simple fact that that young person still reached out, even though he wasn't there any longer as a school resource officer, meant a lot to him. Because it meant that he had actually achieved a role that was outside of his role as a school resource officer. It really was a mentor, a person, an older adult who a young person felt they could trust and would look to for guidance. That's what we're envisioning, is what we want to try and achieve. Our kids need mentors. And I don't care if that mentor has a uniform or a badge, is a nurse, is a cafeteria worker, is one of our grounds folks who works on keeping the grounds clean at MCPS. It doesn't matter who it is. We want to put as many of those potential mentors in front of our kids as possible. That is the key, because our hope is that one of them, just one, at least one, will be able to reach them and say, hey, let me give you some guidance in terms of helping you to make even better decisions so that you can be successful, so that you can be safe. That's the goal. And so I hope that that's what people take from this. This is not about policing our schools. This is not about overly disciplining those students who make some bad decisions. This is truly about, we know and we see the need that our kids have in terms of just having a person who's there, who cares about them in front of them and is able to reach them. That's the hope of what we can accomplish by having an effective community engagement officer program within Montgomery County Public Schools. So with that, I turn it over to Dr. McKnight.
Good morning, everyone. I first want to begin by saying thank you so much for all of your congratulations. I spent a lot of time with the press over the past 24 hours, and the question continues to come, why do you want to take such a daunting task with all the challenges that you all have spoken about that we're facing at this time? And I truly mean this when I say it. We have such a strong support structure of leadership in Montgomery County, and I'm looking at all of you right now. And this is the one reason that I know that MCPS will continue to be successful. And I know that we will come to the right solutions collectively, because we have all of the right people here on the screen to really figure out exactly what that needs to be. And so I just want to thank you for your partnership. Our community is a strong one. Our community looks to us in many ways for the support and the direction, and it's never a one size fits all. In a county this size, in a county this diverse, in a county that shows so much commitment to the success of our children, I know that the support and the commitment is there. And so I bring that to you this morning as superintendent, and look forward to continuing to work with you. So with that said, there has been a lot of work done over the past over the past year, and even zeroing in over the past few weeks around safety and security. And so we're going to talk about the crux of that, and quite frankly, how we center well-being as the core of safety and security in our schools moving forward. And it's important to note that the work does require, again, as I said, significant collaborations. So I like to begin by acknowledging, quite frankly, what and how that collaboration has been for the past year and over the past weeks. County Council, I first want to say you continue to be a big support to MCPS, and the work that has been occurring over the past year around well-being, safety, and security has been key. Each of you played a significant role. Councilman Hucker, when you just mentioned, and I so appreciate, we were having the conversations this past summer about how do we make sure we get the funding that we need to support our social workers coming into our school buildings. And many of you probably all of you I've had that same conversation with. But we came into this year with a challenge that was so different from any other, and that is hiring key personnel at a time in which people are evaluating the type of work that they want to do and the stress that come along with it. So that then did not become a simple task of just having the funds to hire the people, but finding the people. And we're still working through that. I am happy to share that Ms. Rubin will share with you some of the very creative ways that we've been trying to work around that, which I'm very excited about. And much of it includes some deep partnerships with our universities and onboarding the students who are in those programs to come in and serve right now as students who ultimately will fill those seats that we have as vacant. I believe those partnerships are going to be the key to how we fulfill many staffing shortage areas in the future. I also want to thank Councilmember Rice for his leadership. You have been a dedicated partner in this work, and I truly appreciate all that you've done. You, Councilmember Jawando, and Councilmember Navarro, Education Culture Committee meeting, and again, all of our county council members have continued to keep us centered on what is it that we need to get this work done on behalf of our students. So I look forward to us continuing that discussion. Chief Jones, I want to thank you as well, you and the Montgomery County Police Department, as well as other law enforcement agencies. Your collaboration and efforts have been truly beneficial to us in so many different ways. Yes, we've spent a lot of time evaluating previous successes and issues in our program. And so we know that some of it's been the program and some of it's been implementation of what we should have been doing. So we've done a lot of self-checking of ourselves and how we were able to identify many of those loopholes that existed in previous programs that right now we don't have the space to make vulnerable areas for the system and for our children and for our staff as we implement. So going into our new work, I say to you with strong conviction that a big part of what we will do is make sure we are implementing with fidelity. We are hearing the voices of all who are a part of this work and the commitment to it, and looking at the data on a regular basis that does speak to what those stories may not tell us and may complement what we need to learn based on who and how they're being impacted. I also want to thank Dr. Kroll at the Department of Health and Human Services. Their partnership and helping us rethink well-being and safety and security in our schools from their area of expertise has been truly committed. So the well-being, safety, and security truly has been critical, and it's work that has been happening in our schools, and we're going to continue to commit to making sure we're providing safe and equitable environments in all of our schools, and that means all 209. And it doesn't always look the same. What we plan for at a Blair High School may look different from what's needed at a Poolesville High School, and vice versa, and not even to mention the needs of how the same priority has to fold into elementary and middle schools. But it all does start with the focus on mental health. We know that, and the social emotional wellness that have impacted our community to the core in so many ways that we did anticipate, knowing that our students were isolated for a long period of time, but in ways that we're living out, because that isolation and the trauma that many students experienced during COVID-19 is one part of it. But there have been a number of things that are impacting the safety within our community that are playing out in ways that we have to determine as a community how we're going to solve. So I just want to say that this is going to be a big part of what we present. And then we're also going to hear about the collaborative work that's been done among all of the various different stakeholders. And I'm glad that everyone's here today because you'll be able to share that from your different perspectives. We've talked about evaluating the Community Engagement Officer program. We will continue to commit to do that. We are doing that now and bringing forward some thinking that we've had over the past few weeks after the unfortunate incident at Magruder to think about what are things that we need to reconsider and revise based on what meets the best needs of our students. And we've engaged much time with our students over the past weeks as well, hearing from them. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Chief Jones, who I know also has some opening remarks.
Good morning, and thank you, Dr. McKnight. Thank you so much. And good morning to Chairman Rice and Chairman Katz, as well as Council President Albornoz and my other distinguished council members. And thank you for having this meeting of the joint committees together to discuss this very important topic. I would be, when we talk about public safety in our community, one of the things that I have often spoke about was about safety in our schools, which is a part of our community. And I never want us to look at it as two separate entities because we know that our schools are a part of us. And so therefore we here at Montgomery County Police have a deep concern and a deep passion to maintain the safety of all of our students and our staff all throughout the county. So I just want to share that, as opening to say how much we really do care for the safety of our community. And I want to again congratulate. I had the honor of being there yesterday to see history in person, and I was very grateful and honored to be there. But to again congratulate to my colleague Dr. McKnight on her historic appointment. I am very proud of her and very proud of her leadership, and thankful for her leadership and her passion and her commitment in working and collaborating with our police department and other public safety leaders here in the county in order to work towards a program that we believe that as we move forward changes and new ideas and new direction And it comes that she provided us with a phenomenal staff of individuals who are hardworking, which I think just magnifies or simplifies a little bit of her. This shows that her hard work and commitment to this issue and her team just demonstrates that on a daily basis. So we're very grateful for their commitment as well. And so we are here today to provide you with an update on the CEO program as well as MCPS's efforts to promote safety and wellness in our schools. And also as Council Member Rice, the chair of this committee, noted that Assistant Chief Fasialo and Captain Flynn are with me today to do this presentation, and you will hear over the next few minutes from them and my colleagues at MCPS on what we are coining the CEO 2.0 program, and hear data that supports this program. I think this new iteration of the program promotes positive relationship building between young people and law enforcement, and ensures that we are not disproportionately impacting certain student groups, including young persons of color. And I think that the example that Council Chair Rice noted about Officer Wes Allen is there are many stories like that, but I was so glad that Wes shared that story with Councilmember Rice, because it is, where these are the stories that are not captured in data. These are the things that these are the stories behind data, and sometimes are never told because you have a student that's impacted by somebody as described as a mentor in this type of situation, and those relationships are long-standing. That there are many times over the course of my career that I've spoken to people that I've encountered in law enforcement over the years who still remember that encounter or that discussion that we may have had. And so I'm very glad to hear that being brought up as an example. And I would be remiss not to mention the incident at Magruder High School a few weeks ago. We continue to pray for the young man's recovery, full recovery, as well as our concerns for the entire MCPS and, most importantly, Magruder High School family. As we know that was very traumatic in its own right. And again, that is one of the main reasons why we want to have these discussions about safety, so that we never experience anything like that in Montgomery County ever again. The presentation you are about to see comes weeks of collaboration and mutual conversations with stakeholders, and most importantly, some feedback from our young people. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this presentation and our exciting efforts in our schools. And I believe that this is a positive step towards producing a program that I think provides safety, it provides comfort, and we are, again, always willing and able to adjust, as I think that in any governmental entity that understands that sometimes we have to change with the times. And I think this is a very important and crucial time when it comes to the safety of our school system. So thank you all for giving us the opportunity to present, and look forward to a hearty discussion. Thank you.
I think now we'll hear from Ms. Rubin.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Rice, and good morning to our distinguished council members. I have the distinct opportunity of starting off our presentation this morning, and I will do so now. We really appreciate the opportunity. I'm sorry, I need to just go back from the beginning. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to present to you what really is reflective of our collaborative thinking. I think everything that we've heard this morning really exemplifies our desire as the Montgomery County community to ensure that wellness, safety, and security are at the heart of what we do for securing our students and ensuring their well-being at all times. What you will find with our presentation, and we will be nimble today to ensure that there is an adequate amount of time for us to get questions and respond to those. What you will see about our plan and our proposal is that it is very much rooted in culture and equity as much as in safety. And that is based on a variety of voices that we were able to collect. And much of what I heard can be categorized in this way. Many of our constituents feeling that historically staple institutions in our community, such as education, healthcare, law enforcement, have to think very differently about how we approach our work. I can't even say post-pandemic, but in the continuing human health crisis. So our vision is all around those relationships. All of the agencies that have to participate in this work. How do we create the understanding, the shared language, and the beliefs and practices that allow us to put in place policies that lead us to safe and equitable schools for all. And you can see there that this is rooted in what are those mental health and social emotional supports that we are putting in place, and they can include peer support groups, wellness center, built-in time for wellness during the school day, and our priority to ensure safety and security. And that is grounded in relationships and our joint professional learning that needs to occur. Apologize. So to take an overview of our work, we've worked together to really establish a shared vision that will present enhanced structures and processes, things that we need to build our capacity around, things that we need to build the capacity of our staff and certainly our law enforcement partners around, all to support our collaborative work in creating those safe and equitable school spaces across our 209 schools in Montgomery County. We also acknowledge the need to be proactive in our approach, to think about those resources, those practices that are available every single day that are supporting our work in our school environment. How are we promoting social, emotional, and psychological safety for all of our students? And that really comes with some key questions that we are asking ourselves as agency partners, that we've asked of our community, that we've asked of our students and our staff. What does it look like to have a safe and equitable school? And how do we do that through an anti-racist lens that allows for the voices of those who can say, I sometimes don't feel safe as a result of some of the things that are happening? How does that work ensure the collaboration that has to happen, especially with our law enforcement partners? And what does it look like for the whole child? The academic and the social and physical and psychological components, because all of those things matter. And then what is the impact of this work, both within Montgomery County Public Schools and certainly with our law enforcement partners? And so much of our work, if not all, is grounded in equity, putting equity at the forefront. And we know that this is a term that's been used in a variety of ways, but when we're thinking about these things, we have some questions that have really grounded our work. For whom do these practices and decisions serve or neglect? We have to answer that every time we're engaging. Whose voices are dominating or lacking from the conversation? You'll see in our stakeholder input, we've taken intentional and purposeful steps to ensure that we're hearing from a variety of our partners. What are those steps that are in place for our ongoing data collection and reflection of those outcomes? That has to be a key and significant part of our work. And then how diverse are our stakeholders that lead to the implementation of this important work? And so that began with our stakeholder engagement. Who did we talk to? Who did we engage over the course of the last few months and certainly these last few weeks? We've engaged our school principal voice at the high school level, elementary, and secondary. We held a district-wide student forum last week where we had the opportunity to hear some of the, I characterize, most heart-wrenching and insightful commentary from our students at the secondary level. Each one of our secondary schools represented in those 230 students, as well as our virtual academy. And then we went back to our SSSW and SWAG. We've taken a look at the recommendations that they've put forth, as well as going back to talk to them about where MCPS is in this process and what needs to happen as a result. And certainly taking into consideration the voices of our partner agencies, our associations, and a variety of our student leaders to ensure that what we're bringing forth really is reflective of a diverse and large component of our stakeholder community. And so with that, I'm going to toss it to my partner, Mr. Monteleone, to take us through what really undergirds this work, which is the mental, psychological, and social emotional services that we believe are necessary as a part of our work moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Rubin, and greetings to our county council members. I appreciate this opportunity to share with you today. As Ms. Rubin said, I'm Damon Monteleone, Assistant Chief of Teaching, Learning, and Schools. As we've heard just in this meeting here today, this work must be holistic, and we know that the foundation of safe and equitable schools rests upon the well-being of our students. As we emerge from 2 years of these public health challenges, the path to safe schools and to be able to mitigate students' learning disruptions is all predicated upon sound and strong mental health and social emotional foundations. It is the key to all of our success. And so everything that you're about to see here and that we continue to do is rooted in that. Next slide. So you're going to be hearing a little bit about some of the additional support recommendations that we are putting forward, both to our Board of Education as well as in this space today. So clearly that includes ensuring wellness rooms are available to each and every student, enhancing our student well-being teams, ensuring that each and every student has time in their daily schedule for social emotional wellness and learning, scaling up our peer support groups, and really strongly advocating for our partnership with DHHS so that each and every one of our schools does indeed have a wellness center to provide the wraparound services to our community, because we know that if our community isn't well, our students aren't well either. So as we go through the next few slides, one theme that you will hear is that while much of this, if not all of this, is occurring to some degree in our schools, our goal is to prioritize, to elevate, to bring these programs to scale at a district-wide level. And that is going to mean continued collaboration with you, with our board, and additional funding and perhaps staffing allocations. As we move on into the wellness room. So a wellness room is an innovative practice that we're currently seeing in about 51 of our middle schools. And it's a space where students can go to de-escalate during school. It's a place where they can advocate for themselves, and it's a proactive step in ensuring that they are able to engage in self-modulation and reflection practices. And it serves as a way for students to be able to avert possible, behavior that would be unnecessary and that they can themselves move to inhibit. And it should be noted that a key component of the RSSW Mental Health Subcommittee was that we engage in a decision-making tree with a variety of options for our students to engage in if they're facing social emotional crises. And this is certainly one of those innovative practices that can be put in place under the recommendation from RSSW. You may recall that our student well-being teams have been in place really since the beginning of the pandemic. In March of 2020, they were an innovative practice really just to ensure that we could find our students in virtual learning. They've evolved so that now they perform a variety of functions. We identify at-risk students. We support them in times of crisis. We provide wellness check-ins and connect them to additional resources outside of our schools. We feel as though now we need to enhance the capacity of these teams to also include their ability to be really centers for de-escalation practices in our schools, and so that they can be the trainers of trainers, if you will. We need to bring de-escalation practices to folks beyond our administrators, our security team members, and some of our SES program coordinators. De-escalation is a skill that we believe that all of our staff need to be able to have. And so really building into and investing into these programs is going to also require a look at possible stipends or additional funding there. On the next slide, you will see some data that we've collected over the course of this year about who our wellness teams are serving and the reasons for which our students are engaging. And what you can see at a quick glance is that about 80% of the referrals have been around social emotional concerns and attendance or engagement. And one could argue that the former, right, often causes the latter. And additionally, as evidenced by this data, there is some disproportionality around which of our students are accessing these well-being teams. So we clearly feel this is urgent work. The time is now, and we really do desire to enhance these teams in a meaningful way. Next slide. And so a couple other of the innovative practices to share with you today is that time for daily social emotional wellness. So ensuring that every student has time within their daily schedule is an essential and central component of this work. This can no longer be seen as an ancillary activity in our schools. Indeed, we would posit that this is a primary building block for safe and equitable schools and should be in every student's daily routine. So in our middle schools right now, we know that advisory periods are available for every student every day. And we need to scale up space, specifically at the high school level, so that all of our secondary students, in addition to our elementary, have this as a guaranteed part of their learning, where they can learn about wellness exercises, learn how to access resources if need be. And frankly, this is work that is vital. And we can no longer have this happen by chance and be variable by school. The next practice is the peer support groups. These are proven, research-based ways that students can engage with each other, create community, problem solve, build relationships. However, we should note that these teams are currently led by many of our counselors, and it's been well documented about the load that our counselors are carrying. So as we look at each of these practices, we must consider that our staff that have defined roles within their day are taking on some additional burdens here. And then we need to think about ways to either add staff or provide stipends commensurate with this work. Next slide. And finally, touching back upon our tiered continuum of support. This is really an increasingly intensive level of support that we provide to students as we see their social, emotional, and mental health needs grow. But frankly, the paradigm has shifted. And so the resources and the staff that we have in place now is not meeting the current demands of the students that we have in our schools. So we need to double back, think about how we can provide these supports and these resources to more and more of our students so that this program can work with fidelity. And again, this may require us looking at additional staffing or counselors or resources in this area. So again, a theme here is these things are occurring. These are great practices outside of our normal roles that we have with our counselors and our social workers, but it's time to bring them to scale. And it's urgent, and we need to go big on these programs. I appreciate this time, and I'll kick it back over to Ms. Rubin. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Ms. Monteleone. And so at this juncture, we're going to move into the component of our work that really seeks to bridge a divide, because one of the things we feel very strongly about is that having as many trusted adults as possible in our school buildings, given the strenuous times that we're facing, is something that would benefit all of us. And so we've taken a look at how we can enhance our current existing community engagement officer program as a part of our strategic response to the needs of our students.
Ms. Rubin,
so, yes.
Before you jump into that section, I did want to give, and because we do have some time constraints, and I know that we're going to lose Councilwoman Navarro, she actually had a specific question about that previous section. So colleagues, I am going to give an opportunity. I would like to wait until the presentation is over to engage in a holistic dialogue. But if you have specific questions about that particular section, go ahead, just text me and let me know. So let me turn to Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So just on the previous presentation regarding, I heard a couple of keywords. I heard scaling up. I also heard about the wellness rooms, et cetera. And so as I've said before, obviously when we started to, incorporate wellness centers in schools back, I'm trying to think of the year, I believe 2016, Wheaton High School. I know I paid a lot of attention to that because it was my district and we had to fight hard to get the resources in place. But the idea was to obviously expand. And so there's been some expansion. I know Councilmember Hucker said that he didn't think this was a bold idea, but I do think it would be a bold idea to finally push forward that expansion wholesale in this moment in time. And so when I heard the term wellness rooms. I heard the keyword scalability. I'm trying to understand how this is going to fit into all of this. I also want to just shout out the work of the Street Outreach Network. I know they've been playing an important role. And so incorporating those types of supports. And, you know, a piece that I think we can't gloss over is the fact that because of everything that's been happening, right, because of what I said at the beginning, because everything has changed, I think it's so critical that we also incorporate into the schools that kind of those types of positions like street outreach networks who have been successful in establishing very close connections or establishing relationships with our students. And so this idea of expanding the wellness centers so we can have one in every high school, understanding that, yeah, maybe it is a wellness room right now. I don't know. I mean, there's many ways to address this. But I just wanted to hear a little bit about that, because this is something obviously that not just myself, but some of my colleagues, including Council President Albornoz, Councilmember Joe Hucker, I mean, everybody, we've all said, I think it's time to just go ahead and do this. Didn't hear anything about that in this previous presentation. So I just wanted to get a little bit of feedback from MCPS of like what, you know, where are they in terms of this idea of expansion of a wellness center to each high school, understanding that may not be the exact full-blown model that we're used to, but knowing that we have a centralized place in each high school where students and families can seek this and receive this kind of support, and perhaps some additional pieces like Street Outreach Network presence, as well as some workforce, you know, summer jobs or something like that as well. Can somebody just give me a little bit about feedback regarding this proposal that we're working on right now?
Yes, Council Member Navarro, I wanted to be just clear that we are recommending and we do strongly advocate for a wellness center, comprehensive wellness center, where our students can engage with all of our community partners, just as you've said. I personally used to work at Northwood High School as a teacher. I've seen firsthand how successful those programs are. But we, in addition to that advocacy, we also want to scale up wellness rooms, which are essentially a space for mindfulness where students can go as a de-escalation space on their own. So they are two separate entities. One may lead to services in another, but I want to be very clear, and I know Ms. Rubin can also chime in on this, but we are strongly advocating for what you stated earlier for a wellness center comprehensively in every single high school.
So what you're saying is that if we move forward, which will have an interest, you know, a significant price tag, let's just be real, which is why I refer to this as a bold step, right? Like we continue to do these things incrementally. We're realizing that we need to scale up something that is going to provide the actual support, because we're in a crisis. Like we don't have the luxury of time to continue to do things incrementally. That's why it's bold. So I guess what I'm hearing you say is that if we moved forward with a proposal, which will have a significant price tag, to establish wellness centers in each high school, that you would have a separate wellness room, or would you incorporate into the wellness center a component that would be a wellness room? Am I on the right track here? Is that what you think you would eventually do? Because I don't think it makes sense to have two separate, you know, pieces, especially in terms of like the resources. We want to leverage whatever we have.
Or yes, I can address that, Councilmember Navarro. I think it would make sense to incorporate it. We would be able to collapse so much with the addition of the wellness center. And then also it would provide additional space for us to then expand positive youth development as well as street outreach, which I cannot tell you how instrumental those programs have been, from the Plumgar issue to where we are right now with Magruder. And that is how we see bringing all of those bodies of work together.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rubin. I cannot say, you know, can't articulate this enough. We are so fortunate because we have these programs. They're true and tested. They're best practices. I mean, anybody that, goes into other spaces, whether it's COG or MACO or NACO or, the Board of Education conferences around the state and then the country, they all tout these particular programs as best practices. So we're so lucky that we have them, which is why I do think that this is a seminal moment to go ahead and make the investment. They are tried and true, they're true and tried programs with incredible results. And the most important piece is that it also works culturally with our student population. It has that distinction that it serves everyone, right? Because anybody that has a trusted adult or somebody who you feel you can connect with, such as what we've seen with the Street Outreach Network and some other programs and partners, anyone can, any young person would find that to be of importance. But then you also have the fact that a lot of these programs are highly culturally proficient. And so when we're looking at our student population, this is gold for us. This is exactly what we need. And so I just offer to all of us that we've got an option here that we can quickly retool and put in place, scale up, and then it can serve as that epicenter, that hub where we can add or adapt, because some schools may have different needs, but it could serve as that particular, epicenter for us to then build out if we need to. It could include, law enforcement, opportunities to interact in a positive way. It includes Street Outreach Network folks. It includes mental health professionals. There is just so much that we can do through there, and it's centralized in each school. And young people know that there is that place. It's not, when we say to young people, well, just find an adult. I'll be honest, like sometimes I'm like, that must be so confusing. It's like, who is that adult that I need to find? But it'd be so awesome if there was this place that is welcoming, that it provides all of these things that you're talking about. That wellness component is so cool. It can, have some mindfulness that is being practiced as well. It can really, truly be, I think, a game changer for our schools. So thank you for responding to that. And again, I think my colleagues and I'm sure the administration stands ready to put forth something significant in order for us to support all our students and our families during not only this time, but the aftermath. I think it should become a permanent best practice for us at MCPS, integrating all of these other organizations as well as agencies, so it can be a real holistic approach, just like we did when we launched the Kennedy Cluster Project, when we launched all of these multi-agency interventions. The holistic nature is what works. And my daughter's dog thinks that this is spot on. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Navarro. I appreciate that. And I think that, again, we're all unanimous in terms of supporting our wellness centers at every single one of our schools, and feel as though the time is now wrapped solely in, policy that has been cemented with statewide policy around community schools and what we need to do with Blueprint and the whole nine. So couldn't agree with you more. So let me turn back to you, Ms. Rubin, so we can get through. Colleagues, just bear with us. We do have a hard stop at 1, but Ms. Rubin, go ahead. We will continue. You're still fine. We still got time because we want to get into this next portion of it and then have a discussion around what the complement of the next component will be.
Thank you so much, Chairman Rice, and I'll share screen again and get us started, and we will nimbly continue. And so this is the component where we will begin our discussion about the integration and how we improve and enhance our current CEO model. And so the purpose, I mentioned the trusted adults being significantly important. And to open the meeting, there were some profound and prolific statements made by council members in describing our current state. And so we have to acknowledge that we have seen rise of social emotional issues present themselves once our students made their return back to the building 5 days a week. And so, as we presented, we are looking to address those things through a holistic mental health and psychological well-being landscape. And we see this as a prime opportunity for us to also increase the amount of trusted adults we have in the building, as well as take the time to secure the safety and security concerns that we've heard expressed by certainly our school administrators and community members and some of our students as well. And so together, last Friday, we had a meeting where our agencies came together to really talk about how do we look at the enhancements that need to happen around the existing CEO model. And so key to our areas of focus and our shared areas of focus are relationship building, wellness, and community engagement. We recognize and acknowledge both in MCPS and MCPD that there is some key relational trust issues that must be addressed within our communities, within our school communities, and certainly within our communities of color that we've heard from expressing these concerns for some time now. Key to that is our shared learning and shared goals. What are we identifying that we need to learn in Montgomery County Public Schools, as well as in Montgomery County Police Department and our law enforcement? And what are our shared goals around wellness and well-being and relationships? And then what are those standard operations and procedures that will define our work? And that's really important. And so just to give an understanding of the relationship and the engagement that we're agreeing to is the increased partnership and relationship building. One of the things that we've discussed is MCPS really having that opportunity to participate in the CEO selection program, wanting to be able to share some of the thinking about schools and how they function and what we need and who we need coming into and supporting that wellness, safety, and security component. Also, our CEOs participating in school initiatives. Our existing MOU outlines some of those opportunities such as DARE and GREAT. We're also thinking about those assemblies, career days, restorative circles, and staff and student extracurricular activities that allow for that opportunity to build relationship and relational trust. We also are promoting an annual collective agency agreement where our district commanders engagement and MCPS will collaborate to engage all of our leaders in the school level to discuss school and community initiatives and or concerns. This is a proactive step that we would take to identify those places where we can connect and collaborate ahead of time. And then one of the things that we've suggested and asked is the consideration be given to perhaps a more plainclothes style for our CEOs as they present into our school buildings. And that still has to be addressed on the part of our partners in MCPD and their collective bargaining. Our shared learning and goals, this is significant, and I want to point this out. Our work in this collaboration is rooted in shared learning, an opportunity to do something innovative and new and inventive in Montgomery County by coming together and saying we've identified a problem, we took steps to address that problem, and now we're taking a further step to deepen our shared learning. And so you will see on the left-hand side some of the learning that we've agreed to that needs to happen between our agencies. And we would facilitate that over the summer and throughout the year, providing these opportunities for a deepened understanding of restorative justice, to name one, de-escalation strategies. And then certainly we've seen an increase in suicidal ideation. How do we ensure that all of our partners understand what the look-fors are and some of the proactive steps that we can take that are preventative measures as these things are concerned? And standard operations, what are our beliefs around how we interact with our students and our staff members? And so we're saying that we believe that some of that needs to change. We've identified that we believe in engagement across cluster. This is something that we had mentioned before in our previous iteration, but really hasn't been operationalized. So across elementary, middle, and high, and we would define how those engagements would look. An enhanced relationship and building and community component, as I've mentioned, within these communities. Additionally, we are proposing that our CEOs are offered a designated workspace at each of our high schools, but not be permanently stationed there. That gives our CEOs an opportunity to have an access to a desk, a telephone, as well as a computer or a laptop. Also provides that opportunity for them to really work alongside staff members in that relationship building piece and have a space to do so, but understanding that they are in that cluster and can be in any particular space, but not stationed at high schools. And then finally, the engagement with wellness and staff, just the continuing consistent meetings across the board with our school staff and CEOs to enhance our programs. But also, when we're talking about discipline, we are being very clear that discipline resides in MCPS and our code of conduct that we've established. And so to ensure that that happens with fidelity, we are talking about a counselor, our social worker, and our restorative justice coach, just to name a few members, as well as a trusted adult that can be named by that student, be a significant component of that disciplinary process as we go forward in MCPS. And so we've gotten some significant multi-stakeholder participation, as I mentioned. And at the top of this, before I go into some of the things that they've shared with us, a non-negotiable in our work is that at no point during the time that we're engaging with this work and doing this difficult deep dive, that our data should reflect that there is disproportionality that is impacting any one of our student groups, and specifically our student groups of color, which the data has done in the past. And so to do that, we have to have ongoing data-driven refinement and enhancement of our work and our processes and that accountability. We've heard that from our constituents. And so you see here, two things that we are proposing that are brand new about our program additionally. That we sit that discipline response team, as I mentioned, and we give you some examples of who those members could be. We would work alongside our schools to ensure that each school has such a discipline team and they've identified those members. The second part is we've worked on a robust serious incident database structure in Montgomery County Public Schools that will offer all of our principals the opportunity, and our administrators, I should say, the opportunity to see their student serious incident data on a daily basis, to analyze that as an administrative and as a disciplinary response team, and to be able to put in those resources that we've called out in the earlier part of our presentation to say, hey, we're seeing this happening in our school. How do we address it before it actually becomes a significant issue for our students? So that's one. Our second component here is the Community Collaboration Engagement Panel. We want to take the time to thank council members who were advocates for the student voice that needed to happen, and certainly for the structure of including community voice across our work and across our district. And so we would continue to engage SWAG, RSSW, other community partners, our association partners, other student leadership groups to meet monthly, where we would discuss our data, what we're seeing happening, our processes, those protocols that I've said we're committed to. Are they happening with fidelity? Having that conversation with our community partners, and certainly we would be side by side in that work, MCPS and MCPD. And finally, not finally, but we thought it would be important to just share this screen just so everyone got an understanding. So we had that original SRO model, which we've said did not work. And at the time, we needed to make that decision, and it was made. And so we instituted the CEO model there from 2021 to current. And you can see in our proposed CEO .2 model, a couple of things that I want to call out there that are very different. We're proposing that there is that designated workstation, that there's engagement across our cluster, that we work together to identify what that looks like, and that there's a direct line of communication with schools. So we also know that you're going to see some data shortly, And we want to be able to be sure that we can continue to collect that data. So that's something that we're committed to working on. We want to be clear about where discipline resides. Our CEOs do not respond to school incidents that are covered under the Code of Conduct. That is an MCPS responsibility, and we're building in the structures to ensure that that does not happen. And then finally, that joint professional learning. That's so important that we have a shared understanding of our commitments and those practices that will help to support our safe and equitable schools. And so at this time, we are presenting the data, and I'm going to ask my partner, Chief Facciolo, to jump in and walk us through what you see here that has been gathered most recently.
Thank you, Ms. Rubin, and thank you to all of our MCPS colleagues for this wonderful partnership. It has been a true pleasure to work with all of you on what the next CEO model will be. Taking a look at the response data, and there are 5 data sets in this slide. I want to just preface this by saying that this data is from the start of school through December 31st, 2021. During that time frame, there were 1,688 calls for service to our emergency communication center. That does include both incidents where police are needed and also engagements of young people and engagements of the community by CEO officers. When we developed the CEO program back this summer, we wanted to make sure that we were capturing accurate and appropriate data. So one of the things that we did establish was that principals or school staff would have to call the emergency communication center when they needed a CEO. And also our CEOs had to formally talk to dispatch when they were engaging a young person or participating in some type of community engagement activity. Of those 1,688 calls for service, police officers wrote 563 reports. The variety of those reports included sexual assaults, conflict or disruptive behavior, school threats, CDS usage, and weapons. Between August and December 2021, we made 11 physical arrests on school property. 5 of those were for weapons offenses. 1 was armed robbery. 2 were aggravated assaults. 1 was a school threat. 1 was a ex parte threat, and 1 was an auto theft. I do want to highlight here that these are arrests, physical arrests on school property. This does not mean that it is only a young person or student being arrested. For example, the ex parte threat that I spoke about was a 44-year-old male parent who threatened a school principal. We also made 39 paper arrests, which what we are now calling DJS referrals to the Division of Juvenile Services. That included 9 weapons offenses, 1 offense for CDS usage, 21 assaults, 4 sexual assaults, 1 school threat, 1 trespassing, and then 2 thefts. And then finally, I want to look at our average response time for emergency calls and non-emergency calls. In the emergency call category, I just want to clarify something with this data. Although it says that 15.75 minutes was the average time for an emergency call, this is a snapshot of a weekly data from our ECC center. So it only covers 1 week in time of the entire school year. And the reason we did that is because looking at the 1,688 calls, it would take a significant hand processing, and we wanted to give you a flavor. We can also pull another day or week in time if that would be helpful for you too. Our call takers, as you know, are required to ask a variety of questions to the caller and then follow a triage protocol that is a national best practice. Once that triage protocol is completed, it is decided whether or not this actual 911 call is an emergency or not. Also, a supervisor, a CEO supervisor, or a patrol supervisor may hear the dispatch and based on the facts of the incident, may declassify that as from an emergency call to a routine call. An example of that is if an assault is called in and it is, say, the call alert tells the call taker that the assault is in progress, but in fact that the fight has broken up, the parties are separated, and then there are no injuries, the officers would respond routinely without lights and sirens. Secondly, In this instance, if a call was made and it is determined that there is not a life-threatening emergency, the call is first dispatched to the CEO that is responsible for that school cluster. And that's because we want to provide the best customer service to our young people and provide service that offers a holistic and trauma-informed approach, which all of our CEOs have. In certain instances, when an emergency call comes in and we determine that it is routine, the CEO may be preoccupied at another school or handling another type of incident, and then they will respond. So that accounts for that 9 minutes and 43 seconds. And finally, if we look across geography in the county, if we are going from one school in Laytonsville to another school in Gaithersburg, even if we were going lights and sirens, it may take us 9 minutes to get there. I should add to this data that 9 minutes is the average that Montgomery County emergency response or 911 calls take for police. So there's an extra 6 minutes attached here. We are actively continuing to analyze this data to see if we can make improvements. And then the last data set here is the non-emergency calls for service, which was an average of 45 minutes. And that is similar to what you would receive if a non-emergency call was given to any county resident or any county business. And that those are things like taking a report or there was potentially a theft where the suspect is not involved, where it's a non-emergency incident or non-life-threatening incident. And we can determine that from our triage protocol. So I hope that enlightens you on what's currently happening or what has happened between August and December 31st. We have a breakdown on both the racial and demographic makeups of both the on-paper referrals to DJS, as well as the actual arrests in person. We're happy to provide that to you. We are endeavoring to look through dispositional data to see what individuals received diversion, what the outcomes of cases were when there were DJS referrals, as well as when there were in-person arrests. That will take more time, but we are working with MCPS to make sure that data becomes available in the next quarter. So I'll turn it back to Ms. Rubin to finish out the slideshow. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chief Facciolo. And the only other thing I will say while we are on this slide is it really exemplifies the earlier piece that I talked about, our shared learning that needs to happen. This data monitoring and accountability system really provides us the opportunity to see where there are issues that are social, emotional, well-being, wellness, and then how do we get the services that are necessary, and that learning and training becomes integral. So I just wanted to make that connection there. The Chief did such an excellent job. And we wanted to share with you our internal data as well, just because it matches up. This is some of our serious incident data that we have taken a snapshot, I think, between 2018 and 2019, and you see our overlap dates there. But as you can see, part of what you see are the increase in knives and other weapons that have presented themselves post our students being out for those 18 months, and then certainly the level of suicidal ideation that we've seen as an increase, which also bears out all of the well-being pieces that we have front-loaded in this work, because we know that the answer is to really address the issues that are happening for our students at that wellness level. And then as we close out, just wanted to give you a snapshot of some of what our stakeholders said and how we prioritized it in the plan that we're putting forward there. So I won't read everything to you, but as our stakeholders raised concerns about the relationship piece, you've heard us prioritize that. You see our stakeholders saying the trust is not there. And we have prioritized that in our model, rooting our model in community building and engagement. You've heard our stakeholders say that there are high levels of anxiety and stress, many of our students feeling on edge and not able to avoid conflict. And that's why we're prioritizing building out of, that's why we've asked for the wellness centers. That's why we're talking about how do we build out our student well-being teams, those wellness rooms and peer supports. And then the data, our stakeholders said continually, we want to see the data. What does it look like? What's being done? how are you getting to the disciplinary dispositions? And that's where we're sitting that discipline response team and looking to put together that community collaboration engagement panel to speak to all of those issues that we've heard repeatedly throughout our time and our engagement with our stakeholders. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Chairman Rice. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for the thorough presentation and outlining of what this new CEO 2.0 is going to look like, or is proposed to look like. Let me turn to Ms. Farag and Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, who have ably put forth an incredible packet. I really want to say thank you, because I quite honestly made my opening remarks based on the historical context that you had in the memo. So thank you very much for that. It helped to shape a lot of us and reminding us about all the discussions and decisions we've made up to this point. So let me turn to both of you for any comments before then I turn to my colleagues. And just to level set, folks, I've got Councilmember Dewando, followed by Councilmember Katz. For others who'd like to speak, please just text me and let me know. But Ms. Farag, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I actually don't have anything further to add to at this point. We are very happy to meet with the Joint Committee members and their staff to go over any follow-up questions. So.
Excellent.
Thank you, Chair Rice. Yes, as you know, the council staff packet includes that timeline Councilmember Navarro mentioned of all the related actions to the formerly known Student Resource Officer program. So that provides that great context and historical perspective. We've included both SWAG and RSSW's recommendations from their work group discussions relating to the MOU in school discipline. I just wanted to include that because student co-chair of SWAG, Kyson Taylor, who presented in our November 10th EC Health and Human Services joint meeting, presented on those recommendations as well, but wanted to just highlight for everyone that that is included there as well. And a deeper review of the changes from the 2017 to 2021 Memorandum of Understanding between the police departments and the school system can be found in Section C, as well as the school year encounter data. So that's what we wanted to say, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, and thank you very much, Ms. Farag, for, again, all of the great work in this packet. Let me turn to my colleagues so we can get into the nitty-gritty. Councilmember Dewando.
Thank you, Chair Rice. Appreciate the presentation by MCPS and MCPD and the work of our staff. This is an extremely important topic, as we all have said. I didn't speak at the beginning, so I do have a couple of questions, but I will make just a couple of comments. I wanted to hear and allow the presentations before I, said anything. And first, just want to acknowledge the pain and the trauma that our kids are going through, and our families and our educators and everyone is going through, and how that's playing out. I think this presentation and this conversation has made clear, as well as previous conversations we had. The chair mentioned we had a mental health discussion earlier last week. Our kids and our families and our community is dealing with a lot. And that has played out in many ways. And the interpersonal conflict, the suicidal ideation, the fights, all of the issues that we're seeing, the mental health, it's playing out. And as a parent of 4 children and of MCPS students, when you see something that happens at a school or that has happened, whether it's been the Magruder incident or other incidents that have happened, we all want our kids to be safe, and they should be safe. And it's our job, those of us who have been bestowed the honor and the privilege to teach them, to nurture them, to learn, to help them learn, to help them become productive adults and residents, to keep them safe. And that's our job. And I know we all share that goal. And I just want to say that because I feel that's important to always say. And how we get there is the question. And what are the research-based ways we do it? What are the best tools? Who are the right people? What are the right strategies? That's the question. That's what we're digging into today. But we all want the same the same goal, which is community safety. We want everyone in our community to be safe and to be able to thrive and achieve their potential, and have maximum support in doing so. And that's what government, I think, at its best does, is give that support. So I want to thank MCPS for that really robust beginning, the first portion of the presentation, where many of the things that we've been laying the foundational funding and seed for are, we're at the point now, because we have to be, as you said, it's an emergency, to scale up and make robust investments. When we put forward that $750,000 appropriation for restorative justice, which allowed you all to take and train all the middle school staff, 1,400 people and educators, we did that almost 2 years ago now. That was a big investment, but we need to keep it going, right? And that's embedded. The wellness centers, when I asked Henry Johnson, Dr. Smith's chief of staff, when he was retiring, what's the number one thing we should do to improve student learning and well-being? He said, add a wellness center to every high school. That was what he told me, 2 years ago. And we costed that out and have worked with HHS and others to see what that would cost. And now we're at the point where we're like, yeah, we have to absolutely do that. And it was work done even before then. So all of the stuff you're saying there, absolutely agree with. And I think those are things that we are there to support you with 1,000%, to make sure our students and the educators in the community have those supports to get to these root causes of why we're having conflict, of why we are having increased mental health issues and the like in schools. And so I'm really excited about that, and I appreciate all the work that's gone in there, and looking forward to partnering with you on that. I do have to say, I do want to ask a question and then give a comment on the role of law enforcement in this response, because I think it's an important question, something that we've been talking about for a long time. And before I make a comment, I want to ask a question, because I did not see it represented in the presentation, something I believe to be the case about presence of CEOs during high volume traffic times, like before school, lunch, after school. I don't think I missed it, but I didn't see it represented. But it's my understanding that that is part of this proposal as well. And if someone could clarify that for me as a first question.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to, Councilmember Jawanda. I think this is an ongoing and an iterative process for us. I think one of the things that we've said, and certainly I've said at every presentation we've had, is that we are looking at this much as we look at our school improvement planning process, our SIP work. It doesn't go into a drawer and get filed away somewhere. We're actually looking at it, looking at our data and improving. So we do have to engage in those conversations with our partners. Those are some identified spaces that we initially thought of, and we've identified to say those are opportunities. But we understand and know that this is continual conversation. So yes, we have discussed it. Have we finalized? Not as yet. That's probably our next iteration of the work.
Okay. So just because I just think it's really important we're transparent to everybody about what we're thinking, so people know what the it is, right? And so that we can respond. And so I heard you say that is something you're considering. It wasn't included here because it's not finalized, but it's something that you're looking at, having the presence of the CEOs at these times where there's large numbers of students. Is that a fair characterization?
So if I could hop in for just a moment, I wanted to say, yes, we've been talking about the presence of the CEOs, because one big part of what we know is important in this plan moving forward is we've got to build some type of system of relationship building. You've heard that from our students. We've heard it from our community. And so we're trying to define exactly what the presence looks like for the CEOs to be able to do that. So that's, again, something that is not solidified in specifics, but something that I know has really been a really big part of the discussion. And also just kind of having some flexibility around, what does that look like in different programs? Yesterday, we talked about different programs that we want to be able to have to build that opportunity, to have that opportunity to build the relationships. And that goes beyond secondary. but we've got to talk about what that looks like and where does it start. And that is a part of the vision of what we have here. But I want to be very clear in saying we're talking about what is the police involvement, and the police have always been involved when we need their support when it comes down to safety issues. That's always been the case and will continue to be the case. I couldn't be more grateful for Chief Jones and the police department coming on board when we had the situation at Magruder, because their expertise had to jump into action in that particular situation. With that said, what we've learned from our programs in the past is that we do not want to confuse the role of discipline. And so that's why we've been very intentional about that. So presence doesn't equal discipline. I just want to be very clear about that, because these are the conversations that we're having, and we need to be able to distinguish the purpose of what presence is intended for and what it looks like and how it looks vastly different from what has existed in the past.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dr. McKnight, and you're right. And presence and proximity mean a lot of different things, right? And one of the issues that we've been talking about for the last several years is just how tools have traditionally been used, how the presence and proximity of police have been used, and how that has led to disproportionality. And like you said, in the first iteration of the MOU, the one that was in place for the SRO program, police were not supposed to be involved in discipline, but we know that line was crossed, and that was something we always needed to improve. And that's for the principals and the administrators and the educators. And I understand and realize you are committed to that. And I also think that data dashboard that you presented at the end will be very helpful in making sure that happens in the right way. I do have, well, now that we've gotten that out there, that component, in addition to the other things that you talked about, having the desk and the collaboration space and the like, I do have concerns and continue to have concerns, significant concerns about again, trying to address a very legitimate feeling that I, as a parent, and all parents and community members have, of wanting to keep our kids safe in the face of increased conflict and violence, right? That is what we all want. I have concerns about using the tool and police of law enforcement in a school building in an armed capacity at high capacity times for students, because that presence and proximity has an impact. And while it's on students in many ways, and while it's a great goal, as a goal that I share, to improve police community relations, an historic issue, I have several, of Community Formed Police Training Act bill that we're going to be talking about in a couple of weeks, that its main goal is to give our police better tools and skills to understand the communities that are disproportionately impacted by policing and have historically been so. That's a great goal. But the primary goal of a school building is to feel safe and supported, and to and cared for and taught and to learn. And while I think there are ways, like programmatic ways, which I've discussed before, and some of which are mentioned in this presentation, conferences, DARE events, even co-teaching certain classes, assemblies on topics, drunk driving, programmatic engagement with law enforcement as a part of our community in schools. I have significant concerns about armed police in school settings with students, as seen as a way to achieve higher safety in those schools. I do not think fundamentally that is the way we are going to achieve safety. And there are significant downsides to that. To having that, which we've been talking about over the last year, which are the data demonstrates. And so I just want to state that, because I fear that all the great work that you've highlighted at the beginning that we absolutely need to do, and I think all of us will support robustly, that is the work that will achieve, I think, the outcomes we want. As you said, Dr. McKnight, there will always be a need, and our police will respond ably, as they have in the case of Magruder and other instances outlined by Assistant Chief Facciolo. When there is a violent situation, when they need to be there, they will be there. But I have concerns about the type of engagement being described here. Again, realizing it's not finalized, but I have significant concerns with it. And so I think we need to focus on the first half robustly and work. Also, the other thing that wasn't really discussed here that I think we need to have a deeper conversation into as well is the role that our security officers are playing, and the opportunity for increased training and engagement, or even numbers, depending on what the needs are. There's some models like that in other places. In addition to the mental, social, emotional, and mental health and restorative justice and conflict resolution and violence interrupters and all the HHS suite of services that we need to be doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on as well. So I appreciate the efforts. I hope that we can continue this conversation, because there are better trained adults in youth development whose jobs are to support youth, who data demonstrates decrease the amount of fights and interpersonal conflict, and you don't have the some of the what I would call negative disproportionate consequences that we've seen when you have disproportionate contact with law enforcement, whether it be paper arrests or physical arrests. Again, police are going to have to be called in emergency situations, and they'll be there quickly, and they should have relationships, and they should be in there programmatically. But this, some of the things described here give me some rise for concern. So I hope we can continue this conversation. Not I hope, we will continue this conversation as we try to figure out what the best mix is. Because last thing I think we all want is to be in a similar place where we're trying to do the right thing, but we get drawn back into a similar debate that we were in. And so and that we can do this. I think we can. I know we can. We have to. But the fundamental premise for me is a law enforcement strategy in schools is not the strategy. There can be a relationship, and there's ways to do that programmatically, but we should not buy into the premise that having law enforcement around and available when there's lots of students is going to keep people safe. It's not. Data doesn't demonstrate it, and it's the wrong premise to buy into. And that's not to say that police don't have a role. They absolutely have a role. We've talked about that. So I just have some concerns, and I hope we can continue to engage on this as we move forward. And I don't know if Dr. Knight or anyone has a comment, you can make one, but I just wanted to make sure my views were heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I absolutely just wanted to come in and acknowledge the comments by Council Member Jawando. And I think one of the ways that we demonstrated today that we are setting those accountability levers in place was with the data system, which our current data does not reflect that disproportionality. And looking at our systems in MCPS that we've put in place, the training that you've mentioned about restorative justice, restorative practices. And so I do feel that with that continued accountability and transparency, that data-driven analysis, that does allow us to have that conversation where we are not revisiting past mistakes and mistakes that are well documented, but that we are creating something that is new and can take us forward. So I did want to come back and just, cite that.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Jawando. Thank you, Ms. Rubin. Co-Chair Katz.
Thank you very much, Chairman Rice, being very formal here today. Thank you to MCPS for really a most informative discussion. Going back to the slide from SRO to CEO 2.0, I very good thoughts, and I would assume, Chief Jones, that you had some thoughts and input on that slide as well. And I'm seeing you shaking your head, yes, so I appreciate that. I have said many times, and my colleagues, I believe, have agreed, that we in society have been willing to pay at $40,000 plus to incarcerate somebody. And it costs more than that now, from what I understand. But that's the first cost. That's not the cost that includes the cost to the family and to the cost to society that that person is incarcerated and is not working and is not being productive in other ways. There are certain things that we cannot afford not to do. And this is one of them. We cannot afford, whether it be in a dollar sense or an emotional sense or any other way, to do that. We need to invest in people so that they're not incarcerated and so that we have a better society. And I agree that Montgomery County Public Schools, and there again, the chief can have his opinion on this too, but I believe that Montgomery County Public Schools should be required to be a partner in every part of the CEO program. I think that's necessary, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think, though, I do believe that there should be a part, because we're talking about, in some cases, mentorships, not in all cases, but in some cases. And I've seen firsthand, I believe my colleagues have heard me mention this before, that I've seen firsthand where in those days, it was a school resource officer, but they became a club sponsor or what, and the students, if the students want it, and if the CEO wants to do it, I mean, there has to be a fit for this type of thing. But I believe that that's also helpful if everyone wants that CEO to be in that role. I've seen it firsthand. They truly, as Chair Rice mentioned, anecdotally, but they become a mentor. They become a person that becomes, in some cases, the adult that young person didn't have in their life that is so very necessary. It's gotten them to another place. I remember vividly, and now I'm going back a long time ago, but I remember vividly when I was a school safety patrol, when the school safety patrol officer came to the elementary school. That was a big deal. I mean, and of course they would check whether or not your belt was clean or whether your badge was on properly, but it was a big deal. And it was helpful to that sixth grader or whatever grade now I guess they're fifth graders. It was helpful to that child because they got to meet a police officer when it wasn't bad news. The same thing for the DARE program, and I guess that was third or fourth grade. They got to meet a police officer when it wasn't bad news. They didn't have the fear, and I guess the word fear is fair. They didn't have the fear that somebody was coming to their house to because of a horrible situation, and that somebody might be arrested and somebody might be taken away from them. And I think that's also necessary. And I agree that we need to figure out what's the best way forward. I think that you have shown on that first slide with CEO 2.0 that there are paths forward. Is everything going to be perfect? No, it's not. But as we've seen from what we've changed to where we are, that it's not perfect now, and we'll find out that not everything is going to be perfect, but it could be better. I do believe that it's important that we do have data-driven information, and I think it's one of the reasons it's important is because it will deal with where we are with Montgomery County Public Schools, and the fact that a person sees somebody, and I'm picking on Georgia, and it might not have happened in Georgia, but if a police officer picks up and throws a student on the ground, that shouldn't happen anywhere. It didn't happen here, and that student that saw that on the news is fearful of a police officer, not because their police officers did it, but because they saw a police officer do it. So I think it's important that we get the information that is data-driven from here. And look, we can look for best practices other places as well. I know we have a hard stop, Mr. Chair, at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to stop after this question. Do we have data that when the SROs, when they were called SROs, in a school, do we have data what the emergency response time was for them to get there or to get to an incident? And I bring that up because, as an example, for the Magruder tragedy, when it first came out, it's my understanding that it didn't come out as an emergency. It came out that some young person had been hurt, and the CEO was in the cluster, but was not at the school, so that they really didn't run to their car to respond. They were going to respond, but they took their time. They thought it was some sort of a different incident. So do we have any information when there were SROs, what the response time was?
So, Mr. Katz, so when we had the previous SRO program, we didn't keep that data because the reality was, for the most part, the SROs were at the high schools primarily. So generally, the SROs were in contact with MCPS directly, and 9 times out of 10, they were already on scene at the school, probably maybe at another area, but they were, in the actuality, they were on scene. So, and if they called out with an emergency via their radio without even the school calling 911, the reality is we wouldn't have had that anyway, because it would have been almost simultaneously, which would have been really zero sum. It would have been the numbers. There would have been probably a very few number of calls that would have been put out when its SRO was not at the school. And we would have, maybe looked at response time, but we didn't really keep that data. This is something we have changed our protocols and gathering statistics because we wanted to show the community, as well as the leaders of the community, the data that we're showing you now is and based upon the new program, that it does that, because the officer is now in the cluster, that the officers, there's going to be some time lapse for the time that call is made from a 911 that we would receive it. So the protocols have changed. That's why you see the data that says that the numbers of calls that we had, because we requested MCPS to actually pick up the phone and call us because the CEO was in that cluster model and therefore not necessarily already at the school.
I thought that was going to be the answer. Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back over. We have some time at the end, maybe have some other things, but I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
I'll make sure, Mr. Co-Chair, that we certainly have time for you, sir, if there's additions. I do want to turn to Councilmember Albornoz, and then I will jump in as privilege of being chair at that point. Council President Albornoz.
Thank you. So as a follow-up to a question that Councilmember Jawando raised in principle, and especially in light of what we just heard, obviously security guards are going to play a critically important role because they will be those staff members on site to address the sexual assault, the weapons charges, the assaults that have been reported, just as an example, since the beginning of the school year. So I know Mr. Clark is here. But actually, before I ask the question, I did not do this at the beginning. Dr. McKnight, congratulations. I am looking forward to continuing our relationship and working together, and just want to state publicly, as Councilmember Rice mentioned, that you have been very communicative, and we look forward to the ongoing relationship, which we know is critically important, as evidenced by this conversation. But how many security guards do we have at each high school? That's the first question.
Mr. Clark.
Yes, sir. in each of our high schools, we have a security-based team. It's led by a high school security team leader. And depending on the size of the high school, we average anywhere from 6 to 7, what we call security assistants. And then we have security assistants in each of our middle schools, as well as the alternative schools. So
And
that's sort of the complement of a school safety team of MCPS employees.
I appreciate that. And is that the same number of security guards that we had in place when we had the SRO program, or have we increased the number of security? I apologize. What was the name? I want to make sure I'm referring to them in the correct way.
School security assistants or school security team leaders.
School security assistants or school security team leaders. Is that the same number that we had when we had the SRO program in place, or have we enhanced those teams?
You know, council member, this is just my 3rd year coming back. I would have to go back and do that research to see how we've grown in terms of school-based security staff. But we do have those conversations with our principals and our senior leadership team. What are those right numbers? What really would work? Where's it? As someone said, where's that sweet spot?
And are these full-time merit positions, or are these contracted positions?
Yes, sir. They are full-time MCPS employees, 10-month employees that work throughout the academic year. Some of those security assistants will assist us during the summer when we have summer school to have that safety and security presence. And one thing I would like to say about these men and women, they are there as part of the school building relationship team. They're building those positive relationships every single day to make sure that they are one of those trusted adults in that building where students can come to them in confidence for help.
And what is the relationship like between that personnel and law enforcement and the new community engagement officers? How will they be working together and collaborating on information sharing? What is that going to look like?
Well, that's sort of been different this year because we're in this new hybrid model. So we all know that our CEOs are not in the schools full time, where in the past there was a much more tighter relationship building opportunity to kind of, work with kids in a preventative measure, sharing information not about them being in trouble, but there's needs. So right now we're trying to reestablish what does that look like. But I will tell you unequivocally, we've always had an outstanding working relationship with our CEOs. And the primary focus has always been on prevention and intervention, keeping our schools and our staff members safe, working collaboratively together.
I appreciate that. And the training that these personnel receive, is that all done in-house, or what does that training look like?
It's a combination of things. We have annual in-service training, back-to-school training, but as a result of the passing of the Maryland Safe to Learn Act, all school resource officers in the state of Maryland, as well as school-based safety and security employees, are mandated to take a comprehensive 40-hour training curriculum that talks about prevention, intervention, special needs students, building positive relationships. So that is a requirement of every single SRO and school-based security in the state of Maryland. Those classes are put on throughout the year. So anytime we have a new hire, or there's a new CEO or SRO in the state, they must go through that mandated training.
Got it. I appreciate that. And so I'm just going to throw out a concept, and I've discussed this with a lot of the folks that are on the Zoom, but not publicly. But one of the people who mentored me as I was coming into Montgomery County was a woman named Blanca King, who worked for the Montgomery County Police Department in their communications office. Actually, over the course of many years of service with the community, ended up being a really key link, particularly to our immigrant community and our newly arriving residents. And Blanca ended up becoming a bridge in between the Montgomery County Police Department and a lot of key communities and constituencies who didn't know who to turn to when they were being extorted, when they were afraid, and didn't always feel comfortable going directly to law enforcement, probably because there wasn't a relationship, but needed to talk to someone about a case that rose to a higher level and had a number of layers of complexity. I think as this program evolves, and I respect the comments that were made by Councilmember Jawando about the concern of having a uniformed officer and the emotions that very understandably creates, and the concern that creates, especially with the environment that we're in right now nationally. But that relationship building that we all agree needs to happen is critically important. And whether it's one of these security personnel that Mr. Clark is helping to manage, and I have a great deal of faith in that personnel. But there are cases that rise to a higher level that are very complex. In the gang space alone, I know in the first person about situations in which former SRO officers intervened and helped to address and head off some very significant situations at the pass, in part because of the relationships that they had with the gang unit and other law enforcement officials, and knew what specifically to do with the information that had been shared with them in a way that I think was helpful and productive, and also really strong partnership with a number of our community-based organizations and nonprofits who work directly with youth themselves, but need to be able to refer a case that rises to that level to somebody. And so those relationships are really important. And so I think looking at a position like Blanca's, not a uniformed police officer, but somebody that by virtue of their training and their relationships and work within the police department knew exactly where to go and how to handle and how to make referrals and how to pass those referrals along and how to stay in working with those families through those referrals in a way that I thought was really powerful. And Blanca was one of a kind. I mean, she can't be replicated. She was an angel in every sense of the word. But I think that concept of a position, as we continue to look at the evolution of this really important program and community engagement, should be something that we explore, because I think it could really be helpful. And my last couple of questions are, what is going to be the reporting moving forward? So Assistant Chief Facciolo, the data that you shared today is very enlightening, important, but in the spirit of wanting to ensure transparency moving forward, are those reports going to be formally accessible, available to the public, and what is that going to look like?
Thanks so much, Councilmember Albornoz. We are looking, that data is currently being pulled by hand, so we are looking at how we can analyze it on a more regular basis and build a data dashboard in collaboration with Montgomery County Public Schools so that we are able to provide transparency and accountability. We were just finding the mechanisms and the most efficient way to do that. So we can circle back with you once decisions have been made about how that data will be best displayed and analyzed to the public, for the public, rather.
I appreciate that. And then I have so many questions, Chairman Rice. I'm gonna cut it short here because we have a 1:30 CIP session, which is why we have to shut off at 1 o'clock. But obviously, this is going to be an ongoing conversation. But the community engagement officers, I know when we had the SRO program, there was a significant emphasis in just the mere hiring of those officers that they inherently have in their DNA a greater ability to work with and engage youth, which is a skill and I've been in the youth development space for 20 years. I can speak in the first person. Not everyone has. And being able to really connect with our young adults in a way that's meaningful and authentic and that will be respectful all the way around and better put them in a position to understand their concerns and where they're coming from. What is the process by which we are selecting these officers? I know we're not just randomly picking people within each police precinct, but Chief Jones, could you talk a little bit about and shed light on how these officers are being selected in the first place?
Yes, absolutely. So what we have is a competitive process that we actually announce when we have position vacancies that are dedicated as such as a community engagement officer. We list the attributes that are needed for and description of the job and the attributes needed and characteristics of the officers that and what are the requirements of that particular job. It is a competitive process, as I noted, and the officers are then brought before a panel and it's an interview. And that information is documented through our personnel and our labor agreement. And then the assistant chief, which is Chief Fasiolo, he will make a determination on the selection of that school resource officer. The community engagement officer. That community engagement officer, if they do not have not been to the training that falls under the Maryland Safe to Learn Act, which is under the School Resource Officer Program, which is the extensive 40-hour program that all of our the majority of our CEOs have that training because the majority of them were previous SROs. Then those officers will be required to actually go to that training at the next available session in order for them to maintain their roles in that school. So we take this very seriously of the selection of the officers that we know that have the right attitude and working with young people and the partnerships that they have within our school system so that they can be very effective in accomplishing the goal and the mission in which we set them out to do in the performance of their duties.
I appreciate that. And just the last two are just comments because we just don't have time to get into questions. But another really important part of this equation is obviously our parents. And, just holistically, as we address the needs of our students and to try our best to address the underlying conditions that are leading to, the crisis that we're seeing before us, how we engage parents in this discussion is obviously really important, and creating a time and space for us to be able to have these authentic conversations is also really important. There are widely differing views that we are seeing and feeling, and they cross every high school. It's not just, it is all high schools that we are hearing from in correspondence right now from families who are deeply concerned, and it is a cross representation multiculturally and ethnically across the board. As Councilmember Navarro noted and Council Chairman Rice, we are getting a lot of different perspectives here. So I think in a follow-up conversation, I'd like to better understand how parents are engaged in these conversations, how they're involved in some of the decision-making that's occurring here, because obviously that's really important for them to be able to have a say, as well as their students, as their children. And us as public officials. And the last thing I'll say is this. I just recently met with our Victims Assistance Commission, and each one of those cases that was reported by Assistant Chief Faciola represents a victim, somebody who has been the victim of an assault, whether it be sexual assaults or otherwise. And so we're going to have to enhance our wraparound services for those victims of those situations that are getting to a much higher level and of our deep of concern, because the ripple effect is profound, not just to the students who've been the victims of those crimes, but the people that have witnessed them, the people that have been somehow involved in them, is really profound as well. So, I mean, the stuff we're seeing is so serious and at levels that I've never seen in 20 years of doing this work. So it is heartening to have this conversation right now, and obviously one that we're going to continue to have. So thanks, Chairman Rice. I went way over there, but wanted to share those thoughts and reflections.
No, thank you very much, Council President Albornoz, and certainly one in which Mr. Co-Chair, I think, will definitely want to do a follow-up to this meeting at some point to address many of the issues and some of the concerns, and then also be able to hear some of the responses to some of the questions that have been posed today. Ideally, when it comes to data, ideally when it comes to rollout, those kinds of things are incredibly important. Let me start off by reading a quote, and it's mine. It says, "I no longer feel like the daily presence of police in our schools in an enforcement capacity fosters a safe environment. That's what I said. And it's very interesting because the CEO 2.0 program is not an enforcement police capacity program. So I want to reiterate what I think that Dr. McKnight said, because I think that it's really important for us to acknowledge that we're changing and coming up with a new iteration of what it is that we are doing. This is not about enforcement. This is not about engagement from the standpoint of discipline. It is engagement from the standpoint of positive youth development. I just want to be very clear, because there are many people who are going to say, well, wait a minute, how do you keep going back and forth? And it's not just about me, it's just about us in general in terms of policy. What we did was we said that the current system, albeit had great things that were associated with it, had other things that were negative outcomes, and we needed to address them. And the current program could not be fixed to address those issues. What we had to do is build up a brand new program from the ground up that started with those as the premise. Now, will we be dependent upon people to adhere to some of the guidelines? Well, that's always the case. I mean, every single kind of program that we do and we lay out what those guidelines are, we are going to expect for people to adhere to what it is that we say is important for us to have this program operate in true efficacy, right? But from that standpoint, we shouldn't then therefore assign it to the negatives that were associated with a completely different program. I just want to be clear about that, because I think that's incredibly important. And I want folks to understand that we actually do have police officers that are there to deter violence. I want to remind people, every single time that we have an incident at a mosque or a synagogue, what is the first thing that we ask for in our communities? For police presence to be there to deter violence against those people that are going there. It's the first thing we do, and we all hold hands and say, this is what we want to do. So why would we not acknowledge the fact that we do have cases in which we utilize our officers to deter violence from places of worship where our own constituents go, where children go, right? The majority of our mosques and synagogues and houses of worship have daycares, have all kinds of programs, and we want to ensure their safety. And so we put armed police officers there to protect them. And the community rallies behind and says, yes, we want to do that. Our schools are microcosms of our community. In fact, some of them are larger than some cities across the United States of America. And so from that standpoint, how would we not acknowledge that something like that is something that we may want to consider from that perspective alone? So that is a part. And so I do want to be very clear that while they are not there for that sole purpose, they also can serve in that capacity, and that there's nothing wrong with that, because we allow for it and support it in every single other aspect throughout our community. We have police officers that are at our games. I was there when they responded, and I will tell you and tell this story again because it was a shining example of exactly how it should work between police officers and school security when the incident occurred at Seneca Valley High School at the football game against Northwest High School. I was there. I witnessed the entire event unfold, and I saw officers let security for MCPS lead. In fact, it was my good friend who actually I went to school with in elementary school, Allison Baber, who was actually the leading security officer that responded to engage with the student whom she knew and try and de-escalate the situation while police officers secured a perimeter to ensure that no one else could infringe upon the fact of Allison being able to address the young woman. That's an example of exactly what can happen when we have a system that's set in place to ensure that those priorities laid out as a part of this vision are met. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And that's what I think we can do, but we do have to have trust. We have to have trust. We have to trust in that that's the intentions of this system. We have to trust that the things that we have done, both as a locality, and you heard it from Councilmember Juando in terms of some of the legislation locally we put in, and the statewide legislation that holds police accountable if they do things that are untenable, like what you heard from Councilmember Katz if you had an officer throwing a child on the ground. Those things are not acceptable, and now we have processes in place to ensure that those kinds of situations will be handled what we deem appropriately. That's what we built. So on top of that foundation, we can now see a better system that allows for an officer to serve in a non-enforcement capacity, assisting our school safety and security, and ensuring that our community is safe. It is not their sole responsibility. It's the responsibility of every single adult in that building to ensure. And we saw it at Magruder. We saw teachers step up. We saw a nurse who was the first responder step up and be the person who ensured that that student's life was protected and saved. She's the one who was the first responder in that instance. Those kinds of things will continue. We will see those things as we go on throughout, as we see staff and security and other personnel lead the way in terms of making sure that we respond to these incidents. But if we do have an unfortunate incident to where we do have to have an officer respond, we can also have someone there just in case. It's the fire extinguisher in the kitchen. You never pay attention to it until you need it. That's what our hope is. Our hope is by some of the changes that are made with uniforms, in terms of procedures, where folks are located, that we will actually see the community engagement officer be that fire extinguisher, that person that's there just in case we need them. So with that, I want to thank all of our partners and say thank you so much for everything that you have done in really being thoughtful, listening to all partners. I really want to thank Ms. Rubin, your engagement with SWAG and with RSSSW. When we insisted that you meet with them and talk through this proposal, that's really important to us. I know it's important to Councilmember Juando and to all of us on this call. So with that, Mr. Co-Chair, do you have any final words before we close out for today?
No, I don't. We're at 1 o'clock and we have a hard stop, and I've gotten a couple of texts that have reminded me that we're at a hard stop. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate everyone being here.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate this, and we will reconvene to discuss and address some of the other questions that we have. But thank you guys very much. Really appreciate it. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. We are adjourned. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is a joint committee meeting between our Education and Culture and Health and Human Services Committee. I'm joined by our Council President, who also chairs our Health and Human Services Committee, and Mr. President will actually be guiding us through the second part of our joint committee meeting, which is a briefing on newly arriving migrant and asylum-seeking children and families. But first, we're going to take up our Bill 42-21, which is Child Care, Early Care, and Education Coordinating Entity. And this is following up on a January 20th work session that we had that was also by the joint committees. Today, we're joined by a number of our partners across the spectrum. We have Dr. Raymond Kroll, who is the director of our Department of Health and Human Services, Ms. Joanne Barnes, who is the former lead for children, youth, and families for DHHS and is now a DHHS contractor. Dr. Barbara Andrews, the administrator for early childhood services within the Department of Health and Human Services. Sharon Friedman, who's the director of Montgomery Moving Forward. Susan Madden, who's also with Montgomery Moving Forward. I see that we have a number of other partners from Montgomery Moving Forward as well, including Kevin Beverly, Dana Edwards from Montgomery County Public Schools, and Kevin Beverly also with the Children's Opportunity Fund. Sorry, Kevin. And then we also have two of our board members that are joining us today from the Montgomery County Public Schools Board of Education, both Carla Silvestri as well as Lynn Harris. So I want to welcome our Board of Education members. Thank you so much for being with us today. And so I just wanted to level set where we are at this point, and I really want to thank my colleagues and all of our partners for a great meeting on January 20th, in which we identified some of the last follow-ups that we needed to conclude with when it came to really cementing this early care and education coordinating entity. And I, again, want to give kudos to all of my colleagues, especially ones like Councilmember Navarro, who have been at the forefront of really embarking on how it is that we're shaping early care and education for our community. It has been a long-standing effort. I really want to thank our partners with Montgomery County Public Schools, who also understand that it's not just in our private sector, but in our public sector that we need to understand ways in which we can continue to reach our children and set them up for success. That is what this entity is all about. And it really is an all-hands-on-deck approach, which is why I love Montgomery Moving Forward being a part of this to ensure that private sector plays a role. And understanding that workforce development is childhood development. It is making sure that we're taking care of our kids and our families, because that is important to companies that look to locate here, as well as those employees who need to live here, who need to still make sure that their families are well taken care of. And so from that perspective, I think that we really are on the right track and are moving forward and setting a great example, not only for this state, but for this nation in terms of how to address these issues that are pressing right now. You hear so many people talking about the global pandemic recovery and what it means to get people back to work. Well, many people understand that high quality access to high quality childcare that is affordable is something that is incredibly important to getting folks back to work. And so from that perspective, we are at the forefront when it comes to the recovery mission. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Yao and to Mr. Drummer to walk us through some of the key points that we identified from the last work session in terms of where we want it to be. We are expected, colleagues, to make some recommendations. I know that you've been able to see some of the items that staff has been able to put forth as decision points. And so it's my hope that we can dispense of this and then get this to our full council so that we can move forward with this. But again, really want to thank you, Mr. Drummer. I know you worked with Ms. Yao on some of this as well. Just really wanted to thank you so much for your great work. It's not easy in really navigating what is a brand new system and creating something that's going to be dynamic in terms of changing the paradigm, but certainly appreciate all of the great work that you've done. Let me turn it over to my co-chair and president of the council for a few words, President Albornoz.
Thank you, Chairman Rice. Well, it's been an honor to be a co-lead on this with you and Councilmember Navarro with the support of all of our colleagues. Our three respective offices have been doing a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of really strong collaboration. So I do want to give all of them a shout out, and of course, working closely with Mr. Drummer and Ms. Yao. I think we've got a document that we can all be proud of and that we will be working through today. You laid it out perfectly in our last session, and I think we'll make those key decision points today and hopefully vote this out of committee and get it to full council so we can start the hard work of starting to put this into action because we know it's really important and pressing right now. So Chairman Rice, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And so, Mr. Drummer, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
Okay, good afternoon. As you mentioned, this is the second work session, so I won't go over what the bill does. Last time we talked about the fiscal and economic impact. OMB estimated it at $600,000 a year, and the price is basically because you're designating a private nonprofit corporation to do some of this work. and they will need their own staff and funding. You also talked last time about the potential overlap with the existing Early Childhood Coordinating Council. And although no formal decision was made, it seemed like the sentiment was that's something you can deal with later. It doesn't have to be done in this bill. Then we moved on to the issue raised by the county attorney's office of a potential conflict of interest under the county ethics law. And you did approve an amendment, which is on the packet on page 5, and actually in the bill too, which would say that each member appointed from the public sector as an ex officio member represents the public interest and is not precluded from participating in a matter as a board member if that member's government employer is a party to the matter. So that takes care of that. Then we move up to where we kind of stopped was a discussion about the composition of the board of directors and the fact that we have the bill currently has a board with a majority of public sector ex officio members, 13 of the 25. There was some discussion of what the right number should be. 25 is rather large for a working board. And I think that's kind of where there was a lot of discussion back and forth about whether it should be smaller or we should reduce the number of ex officio. I'll point out just a couple of things to think about. In the bill itself, you've got the executive's early childhood education officer, which is actually an unfilled position that last time Dr. Krell asked or suggested that he would prefer that the law creating that position be repealed and allow him to use the funding for that position for a different position. That's not really part of this bill, but that may be a position you don't want to include in the board of directors since it doesn't really, it doesn't have an incumbent. You've also got 3 representatives from Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm not sure if we didn't really hear from them as to whether they think that's too many or not. 1 from the board and 2 from MCPS, from the superintendent. Seems like a lot of people for them to be devoting to this. The same with HHS. I know this is within HHS's bailiwick, but 4 of their employees from DHHS seems like could be a little more than you need. And OMB, how much OMB really wants to be involved in this, I don't know. So those are just some things to think about. I know there was some suggestions about from the county executive of having some low-income parents on the board. You do have parents, whether you need to specify if you specify low income, you need to define what you mean by that. You need to keep in mind, or you should keep in mind, that these are directory on the executive. Of course, the council has to confirm whoever the executive appoints, but without saying low income, it doesn't mean the executive isn't going to pick a couple of, some parents who happen to be low income. Just a point of clarification. It's not mandatory because really in legislation, the executive does have the authority to make the appointments. The council can say no and, in confirmation, but that's why the bill says should appoint these members and not must.
Well,
so maybe I should stop there and let the discussion continue on the composition of the board.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Drummer. You did a great job of laying this out. And I think that, again, you also put up some great alternatives. So colleagues, I'm just going to start, and if you'd like to text me, or you can use the raise hand feature. This shouldn't be too formal in terms of this discussion in general about where we are. We shouldn't be that far off. But some of the recommendations I might make are getting us from 25 to 21. I know that Council Vice President had actually preferred us to go a little bit lower than that, but this still gives us the ability to have a smaller board while at the same time making sure that we're getting all of the folks that we need to hear from who are partners and collaborators all together in the same room at the same table. And so with that, I'd recommend us eliminating the executive's early childhood education officer. As you heard from Mr. Drummer, that's an unfilled position. We also have the Board of Education and MCPS have 3 representatives. I'd like to make that 2. One that would be brought in by the Board of Education and one by MCPS, or they can delegate how they'd like to have those 2 positions. But I think that having 2 reps identified together between the 2 entities makes sense. The current coordinator is actually a position that is temporary. It is not something that is longstanding, and this is deemed a longstanding entity. And we already have representation from the county executive with which the current coordinator sits. Then that's certainly something that we need to be mindful of. So those are 3 positions right there that I'd recommend that we look at. And then, as you heard from Mr. Drummer, also DHHS currently has 4 positions. We can reduce that to 3. Still gives ample representation from DHHS. Does not tie the hands of them in terms of their input, but at the same time, certainly lowers the number that's on the board. And then I do agree that some sort of language clarification, and it doesn't have to be specific. We don't have to get into whether it's free and reduced meals. We know that that's one way in which we can identify, but we know so many people who don't fill out the forms that truly are still low income, might be missed or overlooked. And so from that perspective, having the guidance, and I think the trust that the council, as folks are nominated and then sent over, would be ones that would need to adhere to what our expectations are of what that means. Because if we get tied up in a definition here and then we find a candidate who's really good, we may lose out on that. So I think that for us, just having it speak to them being at least 2 of the parents being representative of our low income or socioeconomically disadvantaged communities, something along those lines, I think would suffice. So I'm just putting that out there for discussion at this point to get it started, and I'll turn over to my co-chair, Council President Albornoz, to begin.
Thank you, Chairman Rice. I concur with all of your recommendations, and I appreciate the thoughtful feedback that we've received, not just internally within our offices, but from key stakeholders as well. I think reducing the number from 25 to 21 does make it more manageable. Having 9 public sector and 12 private sector representatives is important to keep this body nimble. And I know that those 9 public sector representatives will do a great job reporting back to their respective agencies and organizations, and will be able to duly ensure that those voices are heard and that we provide that nice public-private partnership, which I think is really going to elevate things further. So, and I concur with how you laid out specifically how to reduce from 25 to 21, but I think all of that makes a lot of sense. So after discussion, I'd be happy to second a formal motion if you'd like to make one.
Well, I'd like to take yours as the motion as I'm presiding as the chair, then that'll be so thank you for that. Let me turn to Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. I mean, I would second that. I just wanted to clarify. So is this this is not different from what's in the packet that was worked out by the 3 offices, correct? Okay. I didn't know if this was a specific amendment from Council Chairman Rice, or if this was something that this is what's included in the packet, because I agree with that.
There's nothing in the packet on this.
There isn't? Okay.
No, because the staff wasn't going to make recommendations, and so that's the reason why I brought this up. This is what is reflective of what was discussed.
It's in my notes, so I guess maybe
yes.
Okay, maybe I misspoke. It's in my notes that our office staff got together and and recommended the reduction to 21. And then these, okay, I got
There
it
you
now.
go.
All right.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So absolutely, I second that because it sounded very familiar. I just want to make sure that this is what had been discussed. And I agree. I think that this is very doable. And given that this is our first, time doing this, et cetera, it makes a lot of sense. And I want to thank the staff from our offices and Ms. Yao and Mr. Drummer for having come together to work on these particular kinds of amendments. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your partnership, Councilmember Navarro. Council Vice President Glass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to say this is a terrific example of the legislative process in action, right? The three of you all came together to help, shepherd this innovative and creative proposal, and we continue tweaking it. And the feedback that we all provided last meeting, I'm glad to see that reflected in the amendment. And I too had expressed some concerns over a large, unmanageable board and then trying to dictate the management thereof. And so I think this provides the flexibility, the nimbleness, and it allows the board members to work within what they think is best practices to move us all forward. But to that end, I had seen Mr. Beverly's hand up, and so before I said I would vote for this amendment, I would love to hear from Mr. Beverly and Ms. Friedman or anybody else with regard to this amendment.
Mr. Beverly?
Yeah.
So I appreciate what the council has gone through to come to this. It's in my mind, it's still a little larger than I'd like to see, but I appreciate the compromise, understanding how that part works, and I think getting it to a solution where, as Mr. Councilmember Albanese has said, that there are some very responsible private sector folks out there who I think are truly looking forward to participating in this in a way that they haven't done historically. And I think that goes a long way to creating a really, really strong environment for this entity to be successful.
And I would add to that, yay, this is so exciting. And I do think that this amendment, really gives credence to what I believe you all have hoped to happen all along, which is a true private-public sector partnership. I also just do want to take a moment, though, to thank publicly Ms. Navarro, Mr. Rice, and Mr. Albanese's staff. I mean, they have been amazing all along the way. There is no way that all the detail would have been innovated and gotten to this point. I mean, they not only looked at the internal observations and desires of council, but they were very inclusive of community and community voice as well. And it's unusual to see that kind of a process play out. And given Montgomery moving forward's collective impact, cross-sector work, I would say that this legislation is a true manifestation of that. So we thank you. And of course, Mr. Drummer, who dealt with the technicalities, and Ms. Yao, who is a member of the MMF leadership group, we thank you also.
Well, excellent. That is the vote of confidence I was looking for. Appreciate my colleagues working on this amendment and all staff. And now that now that our stakeholders are supportive, we're all going to hold hands and move forward together. So I look forward to voting for this in the final bill. And thank you to my three colleagues for leading this effort.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Glass. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Mr. Drummer, just on the point you brought up about we can't make the should a must. Is that what I heard you say on the low income?
You can make the should or must on any of the appointments because it's the executive's authority to appoint it. But in practice, you can, because you can reject people until he appoints who you want.
Right.
That's a lawyer's distinction, but I am a lawyer. But so are you. But it's simply, you can't say he must appoint this person, because then he's not appointing anybody.
I appreciate it. I was just using the tactic of you answering the question I wanted you to answer so people would understand that we couldn't do that. And then to the public members, the private members, two of the parents are considered private members for these purposes, correct?
Yes.
Right. Okay. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it, and I'm fine with it as well. Thank you.
Colleagues, let me just say again, thank you. This was one of the hardest parts that we had to determine, and so I really want to, as you heard, thank all of our staff, but every single one of you, because this took a lot of understanding and collaboration. I did want to, because our partners are here with us, give an opportunity. I know, Ms. Treadvance, you were on the call with us before when we asked and posed the question about the reduction from 3 to 2. You've got 2 of your board members that are here as well. I don't want to usurp them by asking you first, but do certainly want to, since you were on the call before, and I'm sure have had an opportunity to discuss what MCPS's position is on the switch from the 3 to 2 members.
Am I up? Okay.
Yep, you're up.
Thank you. First and foremost, I know this was by no means an easy endeavor to do and to figure out the formula on how to equitably still distribute the seats in the board to ensure that all voices are represented. And I think you did a fantastic job. So no objections from our end. It is still a pretty large board. So just figuring out, I guess, internal policies in terms of building consensus and agreement will be just a place where we focus, because I think we will definitely, there will be a lot of different voices, a lot of different opinions. And I know this was no easy endeavor, but I think you've managed to find a nice solution. So nothing on our end.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I'm looking to see if any other hands are raised. I don't see any. So colleagues, we have before us a motion and a second. It was moved by Councilmember Albornoz and seconded by Councilmember Navarro. Is there any objection to the amended 21-person board with representation that was laid out previously? Seeing none. All right, Mr. Drummer, thank you again. And we are on to our next item, dealing with ethics. Oh, you're muted, Mr. Drummer.
Gotta remember that. All right, so the next item, well, we talked about the RFP process, not really possible. We talked about the racial equity. I think the next issue is in the bill itself, there was a sentence, and I'll read it out loud, that the executive must not appoint a member of a governing board or employee of an organization that receives county or state funds directed through the early care and education coordinating entity. And there was discussion last time whether that should be an absolute prohibition or should it be left up to just a requirement that the person, that a person who is a board member or an employee of an organization seeking a grant recuse themselves from any participation in that matter. I will just say this, that the board member, if there are grants going out to organizations like an organization that a board member is a board member of the organization or an employee, they would probably have to recuse themselves from the whole process, not just the award of a grant to their organization, because grants, there's only a limited amount of money. So what goes to other people doesn't go to, doesn't go to the next person. You probably would have to recuse themselves from the whole thing, but you could leave that, you simply could leave that up to the ethics of the board and not put the prescription here. So those are your choices. I mean, the person would have to recuse themselves if in fact they're appointed, but it doesn't have to be in the bill this way.
So, and I see, Mr. President, you have your hand up, but there was a suggestion that we eliminate the language on lines 86 through 88, one of the options outlined by Mr. Drummer. Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we should eliminate that language. I think we should rely on what is already written within the ethics language, which I think is reasonable. And to Mr. Drummer's point, clearly, this will be a dedicated group of professionals who will make the determination, especially those specifically who will likely find themselves or may find themselves in this situation. But to ensure that the right people in the room as these policy decisions are being made, it's paramount that we have people who are directly on the ground being at the table with an opportunity to weigh in formally. And then give them the opportunity to recuse themselves through, the grant-making process. But because this body will be so important in helping to guide system building, policy making, policy recommendations, it's important to have those voices at the table. So I would like to move that we eliminate, let me make sure I have this right, lines 86 through 88, and instead rely on the ethics language which addresses conflict of interest issue in lines 124 through 140.
Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, Mr. Chair, you put yourself on mute.
Sorry. Embarrassing. So, all right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the removal of those lines 86 through 88? Seeing none, is there any objection to that motion? And I see none as well. All right. Mr. Drummer, back to you.
Okay, I believe the last issue that I have in the packet is the, what I would call the 3-quarterback system. Again, you don't really have to tell this nonprofit organization how many leaders they need to pick. The standard is a chair and vice chair. You've got here 3 co-chairs. Not really sure how that works in practice. But that's a, decision you need to make, whether you want to leave that as 3 co-chairs, take it out completely, or put in must appoint a chair and a vice chair.
Excellent. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Navarro. Councilmember Navarro?
Thank you. So I know staff also worked on this, and one of the recommendations they sent us was to remove language that specifies 3 co-chairs and instead state that the board must elect a chair and vice chair. And therefore, you leave up to the board to determine leadership, and the bylaws can address any balance of public versus private representation and leadership. So I would like to move that we remove the language and just that specifies the 3 co-chairs, and instead include that the board must elect a chair and vice chair.
Second, sir. All right. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this one? This was another one that I think it was very clear amongst all of us in the previous discussion that we felt as though that structure, while we wanted to enact fairness in terms of everyone having a turn, we felt as though the board, certainly as you heard from Council President Albornoz and many others have espoused about the professionals that are going to be a part of this board, we expect there to be that understanding of making sure that everyone always has a voice at the table and has opportunities to lead. So I don't see anyone with their hand up on this one. And so, I'm sorry, Councilmember Juando, I apologize.
That's all right. Just so I'm clear on, so this would just allow the board to choose among themselves the chair and the vice chair, right?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that sounds good to me. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, any objections to that? If not, that is unanimous. Mr. Drummer?
That's all the issues that I think I have in my notes that are left over. I don't know if I'm missing something or if someone else wants to propose any other changes.
Well, I'll certainly leave that open to my colleagues for any other suggestions, comments, concerns that you may have at this point. And then I'm going to turn to folks for final comments, but did just want to make sure that we dispensed of any amendments first. Mr. Beverly.
So just a point of clarification. One that Mr. Drummer spoke to earlier in his introduction regarding the different entities that exist that have a stake in the early care and education components that are currently engaged. And I listened intently last time and was trying to get my head around all of the different parts that you were considering there in the ECCC. And so I went back because there were early days of when I was engaged in trying to understand this ecosystem. And we did a matrix back then to look at all of the stakeholders, not only in the early child care space, but across the spectrum of education and where we touch children in general. And there were many. It was a giant spaghetti chart that I think a lot of us to this day still struggle with how they all come together to be at the benefit of the students and young people who they represent and advocate for. But as I went through that, I went back and looked at some of the organizations, and there were a few that I think we named earlier, the Collaboration Council, the ECCC, but there's another that, and a couple others actually, that rise to the level of, I think, as we think about how we understand what they're doing and create opportunities for all to contribute in a reasonable manner, because I think they've all done work and I think should be credited with the contributions that they've made. But there's the two that stuck out to me were the Council on Children, Youth, and Families, which I didn't get a lot of information on, and then the Early Care and Education Steering Committee, the ECEI, and of course I'm still trying to understand what all they do, but I think as a part of what we come out of this with is at least have a way to understand what they all do and what their contributions are and where the intersections are, so that we allow the entity and these organizations, if they continue to exist, to coexist in a way that really does protect the integrity of the ecosystem that you're trying to create, not the former of where we're trying to move from. So again, I just put that out there as a point of clarification as to what I could glean from the data I could get my hands on. And again, I say that as a representative of MMF, going back and trying to understand when we were looking at all this data and all these components and how they were helpful or not.
Yeah, Mr. Beverly, I think one of the first priorities is going to be to conduct that comprehensive review, looking at all of the ECE entities and making sure that we can understand where there might be potential reorganization, realignment, just to make sure that we're bringing it all together in terms of us firing on all cylinders, dotting all I's and crossing all T's. And so, the entity should certainly be the one that conducts this review. You'll have folks that are maybe members of some of these organizations that are out there actively engaged in this work. Nonetheless, it will give an opportunity for us with some of the best and brightest minds around this to really think about what the next steps for us moving forward are. And as I alluded to before, we already have before us, and MCPS knows this all too well, the Blueprint for Education recommendations that deal specifically with early care and education within the public sector. And so there's got to be so much alignment in terms of what's there on both sides of the issue and working in partnership, right? Because part of MCPS's charge will be working in partnership with these non-public entities to make sure that the blueprint responsibilities are carried out. So from that standpoint, it just makes perfect sense. So I couldn't agree more. I think that's first and foremost. That should be day one. What's the playing field, right? And then start to put those pieces together building that spaghetti chart, if you will, to how things are connected and figure out if there are efficiencies that we might be able to get out of restructuring, reorganizing, supporting, building, all of those things, right? So I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's incredibly important.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. Any other comments, questions, suggestions? Ms. Friedman.
Yeah, I just wanted to concur, Mr. Rice, with what you just said. You know, if you look at one of the most important characteristics of the entity, it speaks to the entity being that neutral convener and taking a 360-degree view of people, programs, policies, and pots of money. And so, as you say, certainly one of the first, if not the first, obligation of the entity is to determine what is out there in the early care and education space, and figure out how it all works together. And, you know, just to say, because I think this is important, we in Montgomery County are blessed because we have so many cheerleaders and activists in the early care and education space. You know, and I could certainly point to achievements of all of the groups that have been listed today in moving things forward. But we'll get the most bang for our buck if we figure out, or the entity, I should say, figures out how we make the best use of scarce resources within the early care and education space. So thank you.
Excellent. No, thank you very much, Ms. Friedman. So I'm going to turn to colleagues first for any closing remarks before we take the final vote. So I'm going to turn, I've got Councilmember Navarro, followed by Co-Chair Albornoz, and then other colleagues, just please text me. So Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. So in Spanish, there's a saying that says, "El tiempo de Dios es perfecto," which means that, you know, the universe really aligns. And I honestly can't think of a more important example of that at this particular moment, because even though we did start working on this a long time ago, the fact that now is when everything is coming together is so critical, because, you know, I continue to say it publicly, I firmly believe that everything that we have known has absolutely changed permanently. But the changes that we were projecting, you know, 5 years ago are actually here. The pandemic has definitely been an accelerator. And that means that we really do need to seriously begin, you know, we need to start the really hard work of realigning, rethinking, modifying, leveraging, scaling up, really, truly just all of that conversations we've always had, and we've had to do it incrementally. Now we just need to go and do it. And this particular piece is going to be so critical. We really don't know what will happen. I mean, we have a lot of discussions about the blueprint, and it's going to be so important. We need to acknowledge that things on the ground have changed. And so as we go forward, we have to rely on these kinds of groundbreaking structures that now are going to be a hub to innovate, to do things differently, to respond very quickly and very nimble. This to me is a major example of that. And so, Mr. Beverly, I appreciate what you just said as well. That work that you were just discussing, we have no choice but to do that. The forces on the ground are definitely, in my opinion, just kind of pushing everybody to do that. We don't have a choice anymore. And so I have to say that I absolutely believe that the universe just aligned perfectly for this particular moment, because what is coming is going to be critical in terms of how we catch up with all of the issues, the learning loss, the economic impact, the way we redefine work. All of this is just kind of together now, and it's going to require these types of partnerships in order for us to get where we need to go. So I'm thrilled that that we've arrived in this moment, and that very soon we'll be able to vote this out of the council, and that then the work can start to reimagine and rethink the way we deliver services in this very important space in Montgomery County, and hopefully the state, and then the nation. I mean, it's just going to require that kind of leadership and that kind of innovative, bold innovation. So thank you all of you. Each and every one of you has been carrying this water for a long time. And now it's come together beautifully. And I know that our families and our children are going to benefit greatly going forward because of this moment. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Navarro. Mr. Co-Chair, Mr. President, Councilmember Albornoz.
Well, I can't say it any better, so I'm not even going to try. I'm going to yield to Councilmember Navarro to make this motion, and I look forward to seconding it.
I've got Councilmember Glass, followed by Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I too agree that Councilwoman Navarro said it very eloquently. And again, I appreciate her leadership and the two other co-chairs, President Albornoz and Chair Rice, for leading this effort and for all the partners. As was noted, I know how long you all have been working on it, and it has been a long time. And this effort will proceed some of my colleagues' service on this council, but I look forward to receiving updates, to seeing how this works, and making sure that it serves all of our families and all of our youth here in Montgomery County. So my heartfelt appreciation to everybody who led this effort, and it is going to be an incredible legacy to all of you. So I look forward to supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. I'm excited. I remember when we stood up and one of the first things we did and announced the start of this investment with then Council President Navarro and County Executive. And now that we're going to have this entity to continue the work, hopefully this will continue to put us on the map to both federal and state policymakers as we seek to prioritize early childhood education in a universal way, like so many other countries have done, and we've been lagging for a long time. And this will, I think, put us on a good path to supporting all of our children and families, and by doing so, supporting our community. So appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and excited for what is to come out of the recommendations and the future investments that we'll be able to make on this council. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Jawando, and you teed it up perfectly because as we are about to embark on our National Association of Counties Legislative Conference later on towards the end of this week and the beginning of next, I plan to tout Montgomery County and what we've done here. It truly is a model, and it's representative of so many things that we do here, and it's a testament to each and every one of you that's on the call, all of my colleagues on the council, all of our partners in both private sector as well as in public sector who continue to crusade each and every day for the betterment of our community, for those who oftentimes need the help. That's what it boils down to. And, you know, as I reflect on the end of my 12 years here, I look to things like this as highlights of the great accomplishments that we continue to do to further our community and make sure that we live up to the notion of helping everyone to be successful. That's what this is all about. And so I just cannot thank you guys enough for all that you have done and all that you've contributed to make this happen. And I just want to send a special shout out to my Chief of Staff, Sharon Ledner, my Deputy Chief of Staff, Kristen Tribble, for all the great work that they've done working in conjunction with all of your staffs to make this happen. I mean, this truly is a collective effort. And I'm just telling you right now, anyone who is, and I'm gonna probably get myself in trouble, but anyone who's thinking about offices that folks are running for, this is the reason why you vote for people, because they do great work like this. And so all my colleagues that are running for re-election and those that are running for other offices, that's why you support people, because they do good work. They do good things for our community. And so that's what it should really always be about. So with that, I am going to open for a motion on the overarching bill. Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, I enthusiastically would like to move that we adopt this bill as amended and send it over to full council so that we can vote on it.
Is there a second? It's been moved by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Council President. We'll go ahead and raise hands for this one. All in favor, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous. Congratulations, guys. Thank you so much. Mr. Council President, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you.
For our next.
Well, thank you, Chairman Rice. And I think this is connected to our second conversation, and I do want to really acknowledge and thank the great work of our Department of Health and Human Services working with Montgomery County Public Schools, our nonprofit organizations and stakeholders. We're going to receive an update today on the great work that's been done on the ground to support our newly arriving members of our community who are more often than not seeking asylum, but in every case, fleeing violence, fleeing climate change, fleeing extreme poverty and economic situations that are difficult for all of us to fully be able to comprehend and imagine. And I often think what I would do as a father and as somebody in a situation like that, and I would, just as any of us on this call would do, anything to support our families, whatever that meant. We know that things continue to be challenging at the border. We know that things continue to be challenging in the countries of origin of so many of our residents. And we know there are challenges here on top of everything else we've been having to deal with. So I do want to give a lot of credit to everybody and their hard work. And I do want to acknowledge, as Chairman Rice said earlier, we have two members of our Board of Education here, and I'd like to give them an opportunity to weigh in and make some comments. But before I do that, I'd like to see if any of my colleagues would like to make comments before we formally introduce the speakers for this topic this afternoon. So colleagues, just let me know if you'd like to speak to the current situation. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I think that, there are, as you said, there are just so many dots that we are connecting and so many themes here that are absolutely connected. This particular topic is one that, for as long as I've been in office, since 2004, first member of the Board of Education, and then since 2009, member of the County Council, this particular issue is one that this county has always addressed and embraced, and always has sought to find the most dignified, humane way to address the needs of our newcomers. And there is a long history of the different kinds of services, interventions, structures, models, work groups that have come together, which have had an impact on not just county government's particular initiatives and delivery services, but also from MCPS. There was a time when a lot of the programs that now we're very used to and kind of take for granted sometimes didn't exist. But it was very important because so many of us could see how this continuation of particular instability in the countries of origin for such a long time concentrated in Central America. But now we are also seeing how we also are having people coming in from countries like Venezuela, which is the country I was born and lived there for 15 years of my life. And we understand that there is a very important connection between what happens in our own hemisphere and then how people search to find dignified ways to survive coming to this country. This region has always been a region that has been characterized by being welcoming. And there are a lot of networks where people seek refuge. But the truth of the matter is that it has always been, in my opinion, a patchwork and somewhat piecemeal. And this has major consequences for us in this county. It has major consequences for the school system because it is not easy, especially for our teachers, especially for our staff, to be able to integrate everyone. And so I think that it is really important that we are here to have this conversation. It is not, I think, news that some of us have for a long time talked about, whether we should look at models that have actual newcomer schools where things are centrally, located, where there is a wraparound holistic approach versus having a lot of different piecemeal sort of interventions here and there. I firmly believe that we have reached that point where we should be looking at what other jurisdictions have done and really do this in a much more holistic fashion, a much more dignified fashion, with the kind of capacity and resources that are needed versus spreading everything so thin that we never get to the results that we're looking for. So I do hope that we do get there. I'm proud of so many of you who are here today because you've just done extraordinary things in the community, family strengthening, making sure that, you know, that trauma that we see, that is addressed, human trafficking. There's just so many components to this that I know so many of you have worked on. I know that there's so much more work to do. So I do, from my heart, want to thank all of you for that dedication to getting this done. And again, I do hope that we could, just similarly to what we did with the early care and education, which took a while to get to this comprehensive approach. I just want us to also do that in this space once and for all, and own that this is something of importance, and perhaps think about that more comprehensive, more holistic, approach, more centralized approach to support not just newcomers, but also the families as well. So with that, Mr. President, I also want to say that I want to thank you because you hit the ground running. I know that you've done a lot of this work in your capacity as the director of the Department of Recreation, but now as the council member and chair of HHS, you've also taken this on, and that makes me feel great since I'm leaving this year, that you will continue to be a voice with all our colleagues in this space. Thank you.
Thanks. You really, honestly, you're never going to know how much that means to me. Chairman Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to Councilmember Navarro. I couldn't agree more, and I just want to just say very quickly that people need to understand, who may be watching this, about why newly arriving residents matter so much, because we need them. As a part of our community, we need new residents. We need that new lifeblood, that new voice, that new presence in our community. That's important for healthy communities all across the board. You know, new residents fill job openings, they pay taxes, they go to our schools, spend money in the local economy. They keep our communities alive. And they bring fresh new ideas when oftentimes coming from other places that can help us to think about things differently than we've thought about them. Those are just the simple ways in which folks who are coming to this country can help local communities. And so it's just interesting that we spend a lot of time talking about attracting people to the area. And we have people who come here to the area and we're not doing everything we can to support them. And we need to step that up. And by we, I mean collective we. The folks who are on this call, the folks who are here, are the ones who are continuing to figure out ways to innovate and support folks that are coming into our communities. But the reality is that we have folks that don't. And they don't understand how they're actually standing in the way of progress for us as a community. We've always talked about diversity as strength, but never been strong enough to tell people that by them standing in the way of supporting diversity, they're standing in the way of progress for our communities. So those who want to see Montgomery County fail, stand in the way of embracing our immigrant, migrant, newcomer populations. If you want to see us have high crime rates, if you want to see us have challenges when it comes to employment and workforce development, stand in the way of immigration and supporting folks that are coming into our communities. But if you want to be in a vibrant and an amazing place like Montgomery County has touted and has continued to be for our residents, stand with us in supporting these folks who are coming into our communities, because they're going to help us in our overall goal of what it is that we're trying to achieve. It really is truly just that basic. And so I look forward to this conversation today. An educated community is one of the best communities. And so, of course, having all of our children have access to high quality education is something that benefits each and every one of us. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Chairman Rice. So in a moment, we're going to receive a presentation from Ms. Sonia Mora and Ms. Treadvance to talk about where we are and where things stand with this initiative. But before we do that, we do have two colleagues here from the Board of Education. I'd like to turn it over to them to say a few words. I want to start with Board of Education Vice President Carla Silvestre.
Good afternoon, President Albornoz and council members and partners. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. As has been stated, this is a close collaboration between the school system, the community, and county government. And to reiterate what has been said already, these are our neighbors. And so once they go through this onboarding process, how do you want them to be? Do you want them to hit the ground running and thrive and graduate and go to Montgomery College and other colleges? Or do you want them to stick around and struggle and try to continue to try to survive? I think the first is how we want them. We want them to thrive, hit the ground running, and be active members of our community. I always go back to the data. If we keep doing what we've been doing, this population will graduate at a 50% rate from our school system. When you look around the newcomer conference that Luis Cardona hosted, 1 of every 2 of those young, beautiful people are not going to graduate from our schools if we continue to do what we've always done. And so this is a huge opportunity to change what we've always done for the better, to change the lives of young people. And I believe that with the attention that we're giving it, with the resources and all the brain and people power and passion that we have on this Zoom, we can certainly achieve it. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'm here to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Board of Education Vice President Silvestre. And I now want to turn it over to Board of Education Harris. And I also want to give her public credit. She was the one that connected us to Ms. Gillian Huebner, who helped launch this effort in cooperation with Ms. Barnes and HHS. So thank you so much, Ms. Harris, for making that connection. It was obviously immensely helpful, and Gillian did just as you said she would.